I-21. Female recently inherited my mom's estate after her passing and began residing there. It's been a tremendous hassle dealing with emptying it out for sale while working full-time. Not to mention the complications with probate lawyers and my realtor. The icing on the cake has been dealing with the old woman living in the neighboring house. The first instance was when I realized there was likely something wrong with her mentally. She came into my driveway to talk while I was filling up a rented dumpster with belongings from inside the house. She went on and on about a plastic baton she had given to my little sister when she was a toddler. My sister is 13 now, so it must have been at least 7 years ago. The old lady was desperate to give it to one of her nieces, so if I found it while cleaning, I was to return it immediately. All this fuss over a dollar store toy. I was annoyed, and she wouldn't stop talking, so I made an excuse to go inside. After I said goodbye and shut the door behind me, I could still hear her talking as if I were still standing there. Weird. A few days later, a truck came to pick up the dumpster. My car was in the driveway, but I wasn't home to move it, resulting in the driver driving over my lawn to reach the dumpster and leaving a tire track. It's whatever. I don't care. Later in the day, the old lady was pounding on my door. She was furious and screaming that there was a tire track on her lawn. But, as I said before, it's not on her lawn, it's on mine. Nowhere even close to the property line. She insisted it was her lawn, and that I needed to take care of the track ASAP. Okay, whatever, I'll fix it. Anything to get her to stop screaming and away from my front door. The next day, I arrived at the house to find that she had dug up the area where the tire track was and planted grass seeds. Maybe she felt bad for yelling at me? I dismissed it. Although I found it weird that she was doing lawn work on property she didn't own. There were a few other small odd encounters, and the fact that every time I stepped outside, she immediately came out to try and engage with me. But I saved the weirdest for last. As I mentioned, I was living in the house my mom left, specifically in an upstairs bedroom. I live alone. One morning, I came downstairs and found an envelope on the first step right by the front door. Inside was a card signed with the old lady's name. She wrote how she was sorry about my mom, as she had also lost her mom at my age, which made her feel connected to me, along with some other "I'm here for you" type sentiments. But I did not put this card here, and it was not here when I went upstairs to go to bed. The only explanation is that she had come into my house at night while I was sleeping and left it on the stairs. Who knows what else she touched or did while inside my house while I was asleep. Very creeped out. I am not going to confront her about entering my house, but I will be avoiding her like the plague. I'm moving into an apartment and will soon be rid of her. I do know I am never leaving a door unlocked again. Edit. For all the commenters saying I'm being insensitive to a mentally ill person, no, she does not have dementia. Just a loony 65-year-old who's cool with entering someone's house when she feels like it. I'm not obligated to be nice to someone who committed a crime, violated my space, or screamed in my face. Mental illness or not. You can't diagnose someone you've never met off a Reddit post. So, I'm not exactly sure if it belongs here or not. I'll remove it if it does not. But for now, this is one of the creepiest moments of my life. So, I live in a commercial building in a pretty conservative country. Underneath our flat, there's a dental office and the owner is in good terms with my parents. So my dad arranged for my front teeth to be pushed back without braces, as they are just mildly outwards, not too much. So the owner, who's the head dentist, decides to do it with retainers. Since I live in the building, I usually go after all his usual appointments are done, so that I don't have to book appointments in advance and he can see me for a longer time. I usually went there with a guardian or someone from my dad's office, which was one floor above our apartment, but this particular day, everyone was busy. Usually, a female dentist used to see me, but today nobody was there except the head dentist. Not even the receptionist was there. The entire place was empty, and it was around 9 p.m. and I was alone with this guy. So, I know this guy to be a little touchy-touchy with other dentists, but he hadn't tried anything with me, so I didn't think of myself to be in danger or anything. But for some reason, as soon as I entered the room, I felt a certain uneasiness I can't quite explain. He is super trustworthy, as he is like this ultra-religious person, and my parents know him and stuff. Also, I'm in my building. What's the worst that could happen, right? Anyway, so when I go, he is tightening up my retainers and is checking if it's fixed when I feel him pushing his penis against my leg. And I'm like WTF, and thought maybe he didn't realize it. But then he changes the position of the chair and starts doing it more. And at this point, he is almost on top of me as he tries to check my teeth. At that moment, I was just scared, because it occurred to me that I'm completely alone here, so nobody could hear me scream. And he had dental stuff in my mouth, which weren't letting me talk, let alone scream. The entire time I was just trying to move away from that position, but he wasn't letting me. And then finally, when he goes away, I just said goodbye and left. Now, as I said, I live in a very conservative country where you don't really talk to your parents about anything sexual. I learned about the birds and the bees online, so when I asked by my father why I don't want to go for my next session, I couldn't say anything aside from that I was uncomfortable with the male dentist. I think he understood what I meant, so he never sent me there again. And I still have outward teeth because I'm traumatized and creeped the heck out. I've always been afraid of the dark. More than that, I've always been afraid of the curtains being open at night. The big black void of the backyard from the kitchen window is unnerving, so I make it a point to close the curtains before nightfall. That said, the first incident happened about a week and a half ago. Now, our neighbors across the street had a lot of company lately, so the sound of car doors and people talking and stuff like that had been a common thing the past few weeks. They'd only lived there for about 2 months, and since they moved in, lots of people came and went. However, this usually stopped when it started to get dark, at least on most nights. So, when I started hearing sounds akin to doors opening and closing outside, I got a little nervous. I started thinking that maybe the neighbors were just having a random night visit from someone. Some people do, I do sometimes, so I kind of put it out of my mind. I just continued watching videos with my husband. After about an hour, he fell asleep and I kind of rested my head on his shoulder, still watching videos. Until our dog, Penny, rose her head up and started growling. This dog is a master alarm. Anytime she hears something outside that doesn't seem right, mostly just at people showing up unexpectedly or people talking outside or something, she will perk up and growl or bark. Whenever she does, I go on high alert, especially at night. Our other dog, Clementine, isn't so quick to be aggressive. She's still a pup, only 7 months old. She had no reaction to this except to sit up and try to play with Penny while she swerved away from her, ears and tail pointing straight up and alert. I immediately lifted myself from my husband's shoulder and got out of bed. I should note that for the past couple of weeks, we've slept in the living room as we are having our bedroom and bathroom renovated on. Our mattress is on the floor between the couches. Just behind us is a small hall that leads to the laundry room and one of the 2 back doors on the house. On this back door is a window with a small white curtain. I hate that door. The curtain on it is very see-through. I try my best to avoid it at night, but as it's the most readily available window, it was the one I went to check and see what Penny was barking at. When all I saw was darkness, I checked the front windows and saw nothing. After a while, Penny calmed down and took her place at the foot of the bed next to the couch. Clementine, too, took her place sleeping in front of the windows behind the couch that's in front of our bed. I put it out of my mind, thinking maybe she was having a senior moment. She's 12 years old, and she has had moments where she's barked at nothing. When I heard the sound of rustling just outside of the back door behind me. Outside, there's a lot of tools, a workbench, and a couple of old washers we took out of the shed not long ago to try and get rid of. There's also some lawn chairs that make a very distinct sound when pushed across the concrete patio. This is the sound I heard. I know this sound because when the dogs are outside, Clementine runs into them and even drags them around a lot. So much so that I'll sometimes just stack them in the shed to avoid it. Penny immediately starts growling again and even barking a couple of times, stirring my husband. I was frozen and did not want to get up and check, so I shook my husband and told him what I'd heard. Both of us got up and checked the back door window by us, and the large picture window in the kitchen, as well as the window on the back door in there. Eventually, he resorted to grabbing a crowbar from the tool closet inside and peeking out of the kitchen back door. There was nothing there. He sighed and told me it was probably just the wind blowing those chairs around. They weren't exactly heavy, just those cheap, white plastic ones some people have, and it actually kind of was windy that night. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that that wasn't it. Cut to about 2 nights later. It was a Friday night and my husband had gone out with a work friend. I was alone, browsing on my laptop, when all of a sudden I heard that rustling again. Only this time, it wasn't just the sound of the lawn chairs on the patio. This time, it sounded like someone was in the shed. The laundry room behind connects directly to the shed, which is actually a small carport or garage type room that we just store all of our excess belongings in, so anytime a sound is made there, if you're in the living room, you can hear it quite clearly. This time, not only Penny began growling, but even Clementine, who never growls, began to follow suit. This made me nervous. I called my husband and told him I heard something in the shed, and he immediately told me he'd head home straight away and to keep the doors locked. I ran to each door, making sure they were all locked. When I passed the kitchen, I caught a glance at the picture window in the kitchen. I'd forgotten to close the curtains, so they were open and in the darkness of the backyard. Against the dim glow of the light in the alley behind the fence, I saw something move. I froze. I had no idea what to do. I didn't know how long it'd be before my husband got home, and I didn't want to go near the window to shut the curtains for fear of whoever was out there seeing me. I hid behind the corner by the kitchen, with Penny and Clementine at my legs as though guarding me, both still growling. I clutched my phone to my chest, trying to remember if the back door by the kitchen was locked or not. I ultimately decided I could easily crawl through the other opening to the kitchen without being detected, as it was out of the way of the window, and lead straight to the back door. I got on my hands and knees and slowly crept my way to the opening. At least from there I could clearly see the lock and maybe wouldn't have to go all the way to it at all. This was my biggest mistake, or possibly my saving grace. The front door window has a clear view of where I was, and it didn't occur to me until I heard the security door knob jiggle. I froze and snapped my head to face the front door window. In the light of our porch light, I could clearly see someone peering in at me. If it was my husband, he would have just come in straight away. Instead, whoever it was just stared. I couldn't see their face, as the security door kind of blurs the image through the window. Either way, I could tell it wasn't my husband. I didn't think. I just dashed down the hall into our bedroom. Messy though it was, with wood, paint cans, and rolled up carpet all over the place, I knew I could at least hide in the en-suite bathroom and lock the door, while also locking the bedroom door behind me. I immediately called the police, who had me stay on the line with them while they sent an officer out. My husband got home first, practically scaring the shit out of me when he knocked on the bedroom door. I came out of the bathroom and unlocked the door and threw my arms around him. Not long after, the police came, but there was no sign of anyone outside or even in the alleyway. I didn't sleep at all, neither did my husband. He just kind of laid there with the crowbar next to him. Our dogs were restless, too, heads and ears constantly perked up, peering around them like they were listening for any indication of an intruder. Cut again to 2 nights ago. After the whole thing with the police, I'd had a hard time sleeping. so I've pretty much ruined my sleep schedule by staying up until my eyes could literally not handle being open anymore. That night I was watching a movie, trying to focus on pleasant, happy films to put my mind at ease, when without warning Penny began howling and barking viciously with her head stuck between the curtains of the windows behind the couch that's in front of the bed. My blood ran cold and I stood up to peek outside. The neighbors across the street were all standing in the yard, talking quite loud. But something didn't seem right. They all seemed to be looking in my direction, and Penny was not letting up. She was barking so viciously, I almost didn't recognize her. I'd never seen her so worked up. I couldn't get her to stop no matter what I did. So I eventually just pulled her from the window. She wouldn't have it. She jumped on the chair and shoved her head between the curtains of the window by the front door and continued. My husband woke up and instantly went into protective man of the house mode. He grabbed the crowbar from the floor beside him, walked over to the window and looked out to see what she was barking at, telling me to stay behind him. When all he saw was the neighbors, he got a little irritated. He'd been as stressed as I was since the whole police incident and was finally getting some decent rest. Still, despite what it may have appeared to be, I told him maybe we should call the police again. Seeing Penny that way left me uneasy. The whole situation just seemed off. At first he was reluctant, saying they wouldn't do anything if nothing had even happened. As he said this, he went paper white and his eyes burned into the picture window in the kitchen behind me. I turned around and saw 3 figures climbing over the fence into the alleyway out of our yard. I immediately called the cops again and my husband tore out of the back door while I begged him to stay inside. I didn't know if those guys had guns or what while all he had was the crowbar. The police were there in seconds, it seemed. Fast for them to be honest around here. Luckily, they caught up with all 3 guys, who ratted out my across-the-street neighbors. Apparently, according to the officer we spoke to, these people had warrants out for their arrest on multiple offenses. One was wanted for possession of drugs with intent to sell. 2 of the other guys had outstanding warrants for assault, while the girl that lived with them was wanted in the next state over for armed robbery. It was a goddamn den of criminals. Apparently, they'd been watching us as well as our neighbors to the left and right, figuring out our schedules for when things go quiet or when we are at work, trying to find a good time to break in and steal any valuables. Yesterday, I spoke with the neighbor on the left. She's a very nice lady. She's lived next to my family for the past 14 years. She told me she thought she heard someone breaking into her home a couple of weeks prior and immediately installed a security system. I can't help but think this must have deterred them from her, so they moved on to try and rob us. Our other neighbor hasn't had any trouble, which kind of makes me nervous when I think about it. It's been quiet since, though. The house across the street was pretty much searched, and the rental company emptied it out this morning. It's eerily dark over there. While I have always had a weird fear of open windows at night, I'm kind of grateful I forgot to close the curtains that first night. If I hadn't seen that first guy in the backyard, maybe I wouldn't have tried to crawl to the kitchen door and noticed the one at my front door. If we had closed the curtains on the night they all got caught, maybe my husband wouldn't have seen them all in the backyard then either. Either way, I'm just glad it's all over and that no one was hurt in the end. I feel a lot safer now. Maybe I'll finally be able to get some sleep. Someone sketchy is walking around my neighborhood, which is in a semi-large town 44K, and we don't live in the best neighborhood. Not sure what they're up to, but I thought I heard someone walk by me a few times, but couldn't see anyone. I was outside gardening. Lol. It was 12:30 a.m. Then I took a call from my daughter. In order not to wake everyone, we have thin walls and neighbors close by. I started walking away from the houses towards this large empty lot. As I'm walking, I thought I heard a noise, so I turned around and started heading back towards my house, and saw this shadowy figure holding a super tiny light of some kind. As soon as they saw me turn around and start walking back in their direction, they ducked behind this big bush. I made a comment to my daughter that someone moseyed on behind this big bush real quick in front of me, but still thought maybe they lived at the house the bush was in, and that they were cutting through to a back door or something. But a few seconds after I said that to my daughter, the person hopped out from behind the bush in an almost exaggerated fashion and started walking directly towards me. Not sure what the hell that was all about, but I didn't stick around to find out. I cut through the empty lot at a diagonal to get back to my house. Update. I was really on edge after that, but trying to finish moving some flowers I had already pulled. I was working on the front side of my house. The house is on a semi-busy street, and the same one the person had come from before hopping into the bush. As soon as I was done with the front, I went to the side of the house because I had about 10 plants I was relocating. I was already thinking that whoever it was before, if it was me they were after, wouldn't know I had moved to the side and might be more comfortable walking right by again. About 10 min after I'm on the side, I see a guy walking really slow down the sidewalk directly in front of my house. He scared the shit out of me because he was only about 10 feet from me when I saw him, and I even said he had scared me to death. He stopped and said, "Well, at least I got a chuckle out of you then." Then he proceeded to ask how I was doing tonight. I was polite but short and just said I was doing good, thanks. I didn't even ask how he was doing in return because it creeped me out that he had stopped to talk to me at this time of night. He then continued walking to the end of the block, which is also where our lot ends. We are on a corner. I have some hedges that run parallel to the sidewalk and go from the spot I first noticed him and continue to the end of the lot. The guy keeps walking until he is past the hedges, then turns around to look at me, but given the location of where I was, it would have been hard to get a clear image of me. He walked across the street to where a school is, then turned around on the other side of the street, so he was now facing me, and he just stood there and stared while smoking his cigarette, the light I thought I initially saw. He stood there for a few minutes, and I went in to get my son to come out with me while I finished. He is 19. When my son came out, the guy had already walked past, then back again, and was heading back for a second time. My son stood in the middle of the sidewalk and just kept an eye on him. He passed us and got to the end of the other side of the block. He turned around as if to see if my son was watching him. Still he was. He stood there staring at us for an eerie length of time. Then he finally walked away. So I had started smoking when I started upper school at the age of 12. Not good, I know, but hey ho, you can't change the past. I wasn't addicted, but smoked at break times at school, or when I was out with my mates after school and at weekends. My mom didn't smoke, but my dad did, so she never noticed the smell on me. So one day me and my friend, a fellow smoker, went into this little outhouse in the backyard of an empty property to have a cigarette. Now we called these little outhouses middens. They were basically really little small buildings at the bottom of the back garden that were likely at one time outside toilets. So we were stood in there smoking and chatting when this guy, crouching down, comes into the outhouse. At a guess I would say he was around 50. He was either of Pakistani or Indian origin, and he said in a very strong accent, "Oh, I saw you girls come in here and I threw you must be smoking." So he got out a packet of cigarettes and said, "Have some of these." He stood right next to me and basically ignored my friend. Naive 12-year-old me was thinking this guy was so cool, and I happily took a few cigarettes out of his packet and stuffed them in my pocket. Then he started saying, "You are a very naughty girl, aren't you?" And he put his arm around me. I was a little bit creeped at this point, but didn't say anything. He then just kept saying, "Ooh, you naughty girl," and he grabbed me really tight and tried to kiss me, but I moved my head and got a big sloppy kiss on my cheek. At that point I shouted really loud and told him to get off of me. I must say he did crap himself at that point then, probably worried someone would hear me, and then he would get into trouble. He left sharpish, and I felt really shook up. I had two older male friends who I was so close to, and were like older brothers. I went and told them what happened straight away, and they went crazy and made me walk around with them for hours to try find him. Needless to say, we didn't find him. I saw him again once more, and typically I was on my own. I had walked my friend home about 5 to 10 minutes away from my house before heading off home myself. I had grown up in that area, so didn't feel unsafe on my own, whereas my friend had only moved to that area a few weeks earlier, so didn't feel as confident. So I'm walking home, and it was early evening, and I saw him coming towards me. He walked past me and said, "Oh, it's you naughty girl." I felt really creeped out, and even more so when I looked behind me, and he was just stood staring at me. I then heard loud footsteps behind me, and I didn't even look to see if it was him. I just ran all the way home. I never told my mom, as I didn't quite know how I would explain why I had been in the outhouse, and obviously I didn't want her to know I was smoking. It was only years later I realized how much of a potentially dangerous situation I was in. You hear so many stories of young girls being abused and killed, and I do realize how lucky I was. Also, having a 13-year-old daughter now myself also makes me realize that even just walking in the street in broad daylight does not mean you are safe from sickos and perverts. Back when I was in college and I finally got my own car, my usual Friday nights were taking my cousins and my brother to my old high school's football games, since we were all fans of the sport. The games would usually end by 9:30 in the evening, and after we got done with our late-night fast food joint run, the time would be 10:30 p.m. Whenever I drop someone off at their house, regardless of what time of the day it is or how much of a rush I am to go somewhere, I always make sure to sit in my car to wait until I see them enter their house. My mom and dad were the ones who always engraved this in my head, because doing this ensured that they actually got home safely. My mom's fears were that they didn't have a key to get inside, and they were locked out of their own home. And far worse, there was someone menacingly hiding behind the bushes or against the wall far out of our sight. So the time was around 10:30, and I pulled up to my last cousin's house. The passenger side of my car that my cousin is sitting in is facing directly in front of his house's driveway. So as my cousin is gathering his stuff, I glance over to my aunt's house to see if there is anything or anyone around. That's when I see my uncle is underneath my aunt's car doing some car work. Or as I thought. Before my cousin steps out of the car, I take a closer look, and I now know that this man is not my uncle. I pull my cousin back into the car and tell him, "Look, who is that?" He is frightened at seeing this, and I tell him to call his dad to make sure that this wasn't him. As he does, I pull the car to the other side of the street just in case things go bad. His dad comes out as fast as he could, as do I, and now he and I are confronting the man underneath my aunt's car. The man is way underneath the car, as his legs are the only part of his body that isn't under the car. As it turned out, it was just a homeless man who had a few drinks, as he was slurring his words as we kept on trying to tell him that he needed to leave. I know that the man meant no harm, but I tell this story to people as a cautionary tale on why you should always make sure to scan the area and wait for your family members, friends, or whoever you are dropping off, to make sure that they enter their house safely. I have a story along these lines, however a bit more sinister. It's actually my dad's story, as it happened to one of his lifelong close friends. This close friend was dropping off their elderly mother one evening several years ago. He did what any good person would do, and after dropping her off, waited for her to enter her home, and then drove away thinking everything was and would be fine, ready to call it a night. Turns out, a person who was addicted to drugs had broken into her home. He was looking for anything he could sell or pawn, but when she came home, it must have surprised him, and he panicked. He ended up beating her to unconsciousness and proceeded to set her on fire and burn her to death while she was still alive. It was obviously a horrible and traumatic event and rocked everyone to their core. My dad's friend never really recovered. He's still in their friend group, however understandably spiraled down deep into alcoholism and depression. He's a shell of what he once was. He's a ghost these days. When you look into his eyes, he's just so haunted. It's absolutely jarring to see the person he once was and what he has become. To this day, anytime I open the door and walk into a darkened foyer or drop a friend off, I wonder and worry about what might lurk behind that door in the shadows. I realize it's a low probability to have that kind of incident happen, but to this day, I insist my friends text me when they are in the door and home safe. I get chills even then. Proof that monsters are real and lurk in the shadows of the most unexpected places. So here's some background on my situation. 2 weeks ago, this guy moved in next door to me. My apartments are set up so that there are only 2 apartments per floor in the building. We live on the ground floor, so we have a shared small backyard area with all the ground floor tenants. My neighbor, let's call him BFG Big Fat Guy, has never introduced himself to us, my boyfriend and me, but we had a conversation with his father when he was moving in. BFG is around mid-30s and is an early retired veteran due to disability. Last Thursday, my boyfriend, a friend, and I were in our living room eating dinner. Our living room window has access to the shared backyard. While we were chatting, BFG comes out of his apartment shirtless, visibly drunk, and walks along the backyard. As he makes his way towards my apartment again, he stops in front of our window and starts banging on it, pointing at me. Once my boyfriend realized what was going on, BFG quickly made his way back into his apartment. Again, like I said, I have never met this dude once. Later that evening, he continues to bang around in his apartment. This continually freaks me out. I kind of have a fear that someone is going to break into my apartment and overpower me. I have this fear because I'm small and barely weigh anything, so him starting this and banging around really freaked me out. Friday morning comes, and thankfully, nothing is out of the ordinary. But today, Saturday, as I was leaving for work, a car parked next to mine was parked pretty much sideways in the spot with all doors wide open. I didn't have time to investigate since I was on my way to work, but my boyfriend did, and he found BFG's wallet and car keys. So obviously, he is drunk and has no control whatsoever. But I am definitely shaken up. My boyfriend is going to be out of town for the next week, and I'm scared about living next to him alone. I don't want to live next to him anymore. I did report him to the office, but who knows what the outcome will be. I was probably 14 or 15 at the time. I was alone in the house when I heard the doorbell ring. My front door has 2 thin glass panes on either side, so you can see who's standing there, though they can see you and quite a bit of the inside of the house, unfortunately. This guy's already seen me, so there's no playing dumb, and I can see that he's an absolutely massive black guy just waiting for me to open it. Now, opening the door probably wasn't smart, but it was daylight and the neighbors next door are always hanging around outside, so I figured I'd be fine. I reluctantly opened the door only to behold this man in his mid or late 20s giving me a kind of dejected look on his face as he says, and I quote, "Hi, I just talked to the neighbors over there, and they sent me over here. I was just wondering, would you be willing to adopt me?" Now I'm absolutely floored by this and don't respond. A few seconds go by as I struggle for words and glance over at the neighbors in annoyance before he breaks character and says, "Nah, I was just joking around with you. I'm actually here to offer you the chance to purchase this revolutionary cleaning product." I imagine this guy thought that such a tactic would put me at ease, but all it did was confuse me and increase my discomfort level by a few notches. Something that bears mentioning at this point is that this man did not look like a salesman. He looked like some random guy trying to do the world's worst impression of a salesman. He had on blue jeans and a checkered flannel shirt with a tie stuck over it. It looked ridiculous. We had the following exchange. "So, is this your house?" "No, it's my parents." "Are they home?" "No." "Well, that's okay. You can just buy it as a gift for them. Let me give you a demonstration." At this point, he takes a nondescript clear plastic container with some kind of substance that looked like water inside it and sprayed the windows. He then took out a rag and wiped the window, saying, "See? Doesn't that look great? Imagine how happy your parents would be to get this gift from their son." I don't remember how much he was selling it for, but I do remember that I did actually have enough money on hand to purchase it. I wasn't about to do that, though, so I insisted I had no money, to which he gave a forced laugh and said, "Come on, I know you've got money for this." I insisted I didn't, but told him to come back and speak to my parents in a few hours, and, seeing this wasn't going anywhere, he grabbed my hand with an iron grip and started shaking it. It wasn't hard enough to be painful, but I knew this guy could completely obliterate me if he wanted to. After looking at our handshake in disbelief, I looked up at his face and saw that he no longer had that phony salesman smile. He had a pretty deep-set frown and was looking at me coldly as he said, "Well, God bless you," before letting me go and walking away. Of course, he never showed up to the house again to take me up on the offer to sell to my parents. Perhaps he figured my parents wouldn't fall for the scam, or they'd be mad that he had engaged their kid when he was alone in the house. My friend 25 female from college told me a harrowing story that happened to her and her friends in high school. She is from Buffalo, NY, and often went on camping trips to local, upstate campgrounds. When she was a senior, her and 4 of her friends went to a campsite fitted with rows of cabins on the water that people could rent. As the sun went down, the girls noticed that their neighbors a few cabins down, a group of guys similar in age, were playing music and grooving around the campfire, drinking beers. One of the guys asked them all if they wanted to join. When they got over there and started hanging with the guys, everything seemed completely normal, and they were having a fun time. As the night progressed, one of the guys there started to get blackout drunk and eventually pulled out a revolver that he said belonged to his dad. He started waving it around and playing with it. This obviously freaked everyone out, his own friends included. Eventually, he started pointing the gun to his head and laughing, while his friends were yelling at him to put it away and how that wasn't funny. The girls at this point were fairly disturbed and told the guys that they should get back to their cabin and said their goodbyes. When they got back to their cabin, they all talked about how freaky that was and expressed concern for the drunk guy. They then moved on to other topics of conversation and forgot about it for the time being. A few hours later, sometime in the middle of the night, they heard a loud bang coming from the direction of their neighbor's cabin. Shortly after this, a brigade of cop cars showed up to the scene. One officer came to my friend's cabin and started asking them questions about the cabin they visited earlier that night. When my friend asked the officer what happened, he explained that the kid had shot himself in the head in front of his friends. They weren't able to discern if it was unaliving himself or accidental. My friend to this day still has PTSD over this incident and explained that she rarely goes camping anymore. So to start this off, I am going to give a description of myself and my friend. I am a 17-year-old 110-pound girl, and my friend is a 19-year-old 90-pound girl. This will be somewhat useful later. Also, I apologize for my grammatical errors. So this happened about 3 months ago in the beginning of the summer. I was at my best friend's brother's apartments. Here were 7 people, including me. But anyways, so like 2 weeks prior to the occurrence, there had been this grown man who was harassing my friends, trying to break in, threatening to kill them, and just overall being a mess. Of course, they called the authorities, and they didn't do a thing. So my friend Rabbit and I were going to go out to her car to put her 2-month-old's car seat in the back seat because she was getting ready to take me home. We were in the bad part of town and we already knew about this guy, so I had a taser and Rabbit had a knife. We were walking back when we thought we saw the man waiting for us, so we got our weapons out ready to use if need be. Turns out it wasn't even him. However, as we were walking in, we had to walk past his apartment. As we were about halfway down the hallway, we heard him scream from his apartment, "Oh, I got you now." And he started chasing us. This man had inhumane speed. I've never seen somebody so fast. As we both turn around because we realized we locked the door before we went out, he attempts to stab us multiple times with about a 7-inch blade. We both somehow dodge the blade, and she falls into the wall opposite of me, and I fall into their neighbor's door. This man is like 6'7" and a lot bigger than the both of us. I go to turn on the taser while still attempting to dodge this man's unnecessarily big knife, because I am not going to let me nor my friend die. He notices this and then starts acting all cool with us and tells us that he could have killed us. We have to act like we are okay with him in order to get inside the apartment. Afterwards, we get inside and we both break down and hug each other, then go to make sure everyone else is okay, especially Rabbit's baby. Her brother and my friends were already on the phone with the cops, and they literally told them that they thought we were being killed and saw him not only with the knife but a gun as well through the peephole. The cops take over 45 minutes to get their question us and act like we are stupid and don't know what we are talking about. Didn't even go question or detain the man, acted like he was the victim and treated us like we were the criminals for wanting to defend ourselves if need be, and were basically useless and only left us feeling pissed off. I had my boyfriend pick me up because I didn't want to be there anymore, and I cried in his arms for 20 minutes. The look in that man's eyes is one I will never forget. It was pure insanity and hatred. He had no good intentions, and I believe the only reason me and Rabbit are alive today, and I am able to tell this story, is because he saw we were going to be able to somewhat defend ourselves. I still can't go in public places without some form of a weapon, and this man has emotionally scarred both me and Rabbit and our friends, having to hear our screams of pure terror as we thought we were going to get killed. So, to the man with the unnecessary big knife and inhumane speed, and to the useless cops, I hope I never see you again. So this happened, I want to say, around the year 2012 or 2013. Me and my mom lived just ourselves in my grandmother's old house. After she had died in 2009, it was just us. My mom had the habit of leaving the house and visiting family really often since my entire family lived in the same town. Sometimes I would go with her, and sometimes I would just stay at home and play games on the PC. One night in particular that I was home by myself. I can't remember if I was listening to music or on the game, but it was almost 11 at night, and I had gotten a knock at the door. At the time, we had 4 dogs that lived in our house, and all of them started going insane barking. This wasn't abnormal, as they would bark at the neighbors if they saw them out of our living room window getting out of their car across the street, or heard anyone within a 5-mile radius talking. My bedroom happened to be at the front of the house with a window directly facing the porch and the door. Because of that, I was able to take a slight look to see who it was, and it wasn't someone who I'd seen before. My mom never had people come by the house often, but there have been a few that came over to talk to her or see if she was home. Not usually super late, but I ran with it and didn't think twice about it. I thought it was just one of her co-workers coming by to see if she was home. I opened the door and I was greeted with a guy I'd say early 40s wearing a brown work jacket and light blue jeans, so he definitely looked the part of someone who was from the factory. I opened the door to see what he wanted, and he said something along the lines of, "Hey, how is it going?" and some small stuff here and there. It's hard to recall too much of the small talk, but he did ask something like, "Is anyone else around?" or that might not be entirely what he said, but it did skate those lines. I was still under the impression at the time that he was a guy that my mom knew from work, so I told him that, Yeah, right now I'm the only one here. My mom went to my cousin's house, but she should be back soon. He said some other things, like his name, I think, and he said that he had recently moved here from Indiana, and he was going around to each neighbor's house saying hi and introducing himself. I was like, yeah, around here that could get you shot, since it's not normal to show up to someone's house to introduce yourself, let alone this late at night. He told me that, yeah, where I'm from in Indiana, it's normal for people to do that. He said his goodbyes and left. The car that had been running and sitting outside the driveway on the road looked like a decently new car, so I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured I wouldn't really have anything that the guy couldn't already afford, so as far as being a burglar, I figured I was in the clear. My mom got home about 30 minutes to an hour later, and I told her about it. It wasn't really until her reaction to what happened that it really sank in. I'd never seen that guy again after that encounter, and I wasn't sure what he was after. My mom told me that I was lucky that maybe the guy didn't barge in because all 4 of the dogs were right there with me, each of them pretty protective. They all kept an eye on the guy as we talked. Maybe he was telling the truth, and it was just a harmless encounter out of the ordinary, but I still think about it from time to time. Like, what exactly was he doing there? This happened back in 2020. I am a female and was 19 at the time. My mom used to be a baker, and she needed some chocolates for decoration. Since my siblings were asleep, my mom asked me to get some from the nearby shop. As it was close by, I thought I'd just walk. Most of the shops that I went to were closed due to an ongoing strike. Unfortunately, I was unaware of it, and the ones that were open didn't have the brand of chocolate my mom wanted. Due to the strike, the place looked like a ghost town, with not a soul in sight. I was determined to get that chocolate, so I walked a bit farther, but still had no luck. Finally, I decided to head home. I could reach home either by a long route or a short one. Since the short route includes trespassing through the neighbor's property, I chose the long route mainly because I didn't want to cause any inconvenience to them. As I was walking, a van with 2 men passed me and stopped right in the middle of the road, a couple of meters ahead of me. I didn't think much of it because I assumed they might be lost and looking for directions. Suddenly, the man sitting in the passenger seat stuck his head out of the window, turned back, and looked at me. His gaze moved in a way that he examined me from head to toe. He then gave me a creepy smile and sat back. I immediately thought to myself, why did he look at me so weirdly? But since it seemed physically harmless, I brushed it off and continued walking. The back of the van had this large see-through window through which I could see both men talking to each other right after the creepy gesture. As I was about to reach the back of the van, the driver did the exact same thing as the guy in the passenger seat. He stuck his head out, turned back to look at me, and sat back, all while smiling creepily. That's when my alarm bells started to ring, and I quickly moved away from there. Fortunately, this happened right beside the short route. I immediately changed my direction and started walking towards the short route, which was a narrow path. As soon as they noticed me taking a different route, they sped off. I was quite shaken up, especially by the fact that they sped off the very moment I took the short route. I'm not sure what they were planning to do with me, but considering the area looked pretty deserted and me being a skinny person, I would have been an easy target for abduction or something worse. I'll never forget the way they looked at me. It was as if a predator was eyeing its prey. When me and my now wife lived outside Chicago, we had a peeper. I would be out of town on business a lot. One time I came back from a work trip, and there were footprints in the snow right up to the window. Another time our neighbors said there was someone shining a light in our window. It all kick-started from a night we were being intimate and my wife stopped and said there's someone in our window. I said no way. She said yeah, definitely. I turned the TV off and saw a silhouette dip down and run off. It was crazy. We called the cops all 3 times. They knew who it was, but couldn't tell us and couldn't do anything because they couldn't prove it. Crazy shit. Glad we don't live there anymore. So here's some background on my situation. 2 weeks ago, this guy moved in next door to me. My apartments are set up so there are only 2 apartments per floor in the building. We live on the ground floor, so we have a shared small backyard area with all the ground floor tenants. My neighbor, let's call him BFG Big Fat Guy, has never introduced himself to us, my boyfriend and me, but we had a conversation with his father when he was moving in. BFG is around mid-30s and is an early retired veteran due to disability. This past Thursday, my boyfriend, a friend, and I were in our living room eating dinner. Our living room window has access to the shared backyard. While we were chatting, BFG comes out of his apartment shirtless, visibly drunk, and walks along the backyard. As he makes his way towards my apartment again, he stops in front of our window and starts banging on it, pointing at me. Once my boyfriend realized what was going on, BFG quickly made his way back into his apartment. Again, like I said, I have never met this dude once. Later that evening, he continues to bang around in his apartment. This continually freaks me out. I kinda have a fear that someone is going to break into my apartment and overcome me. I have this fear because I'm small. I barely weigh anything, so him starting this and banging around really freaked me out. Friday morning comes and nothing is out of the ordinary, thankfully. But today, Saturday, I was leaving for work, and a car parked next to mine was pretty much sideways in the spot with all doors wide open. I didn't have time to investigate since I was on my way to work. But my boyfriend did, and he found BFG's wallet and car keys. So obviously, he is drunk and has no control whatsoever. But I am definitely shaken up. My boyfriend is going to be out of town for the next week, and I'm scared about living next to him alone. I don't want to live next to him anymore. I did report him to the office, but who knows what the outcome will be. I am super creeped right now. A 27 female was home completely alone and sleeping in my bed in the middle of the night last night. I was woken up by the sound of someone trying to push up on my locked bedroom window. I couldn't see the window because it was past my footboard on the other side of the bedroom and I was laying down. But I knew that unmistakable sound of the window being locked and the jiggling sound it makes because I've locked myself out plenty of times and have tried to get through that window before. I sat up to get a look and seen a dark silhouette of a person looking in the window. I lay back down for a second, really confused and tired, and when it actually clicked what I had seen, I sat right back up. They were gone. I tried to get back to sleep, but was spooked for the rest of the night. In the morning, I thought I might have dreamed it after I called everyone I knew that it possibly could have been, and nobody knew anything. Nobody was at my house. Nobody I knew would just try to get into my bedroom window in the middle of the night anyways. Especially when I don't think this person even knocked on the front before trying to open the window. I went outside to investigate to see if I was just crazy. I looked at the window and there I seen the handprints of whoever was trying to slide up on the glass. Also, it had rained so I could see muddy shoe prints going to and from my window. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted, but am so glad my window was locked. I used to live in a little building with 4 units in a Colorado suburb. I never really interacted with my neighbors on a personal friendship type level, but we all had good rapport. So here we go. I had returned to my flat after spending a few days with my parents. There was a piece of paper someone slid under my door. I almost tripped on when I got home. Upon reading the typed note, it turns out some creep was using a drone to look into windows. This was excessively concerning because I never had to really shut my blinds or shades. Whatever. I brushed it off as teens pranking us. I lived right near a high school. LOL. The day after I got the letter, I woke up to weird whirring noises through my open window. Then, I remembered the letter. I dated to look out the window above my bed and yep, there was a drone. I immediately flipped it off, shut my blinds, put on pants, and ran for the door. Whoever this F was, they'd better not disturb my leave. Especially since I was lacking in sleep. I grabbed the nearest thing next to me that could be a weapon, which was my weed bong. I just wasn't thinking, I guess, since I have a wide variety of camping knives and bear mace. Anyways, burst open through the door. Saw some moron in a hoodie that was obviously holding a remote control. I tore ass and ran straight at the person. They were maybe about 80-100 away. Luckily, upon seeing a tired, jaded, and bong-wielding idiot, they ran. I could hear the drone buzzing away. Next time, F, it'll be your last, you pussy-ass bitch. Never saw it again. I'm a single female in my 30s and live alone, apart from my pets. I'm on my own when it comes to my safety. So, this happened last summer. It was around 11 p.m., and I was sitting at my dining table, typing away on my final paper of the semester. Behind me sits my kitchen and a big window that overlooks my backyard. This backyard was completely surrounded by a 6-vinyl privacy fence. Inside that fence was a little garden I'd been working hard on, with lots of cute flowers and a little pond. I was proud of it and would leave the blinds open so I could take in all my hard work during the day. I was caught up in my paper, which was due by midnight, and since it was late, the dogs were snoozing away nearby. My concentration was broken by a very sudden, very loud, and very deliberate tap 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 behind me. I froze completely, and it dawned on me I'd never closed my blinds. All my interior lights were on, and we know how that works. Whoever was tapping could see me perfectly. Weirdly and inconveniently enough, my dogs, who normally bark at the slightest noise, were still sound asleep. It took me about 5 minutes to muster the slightest ounce of courage to turn my head, just enough to see the window in my periphery, only to hear a loud crunch and another couple of taps, just a bit lighter. Nope, F that. No need to look. The last thing I needed to see was a face pressed up against that window. To my left was a door to the carport, which led to the backyard. The handle was within arm's reach, and I wouldn't have to look at the window to open it. I called to my dogs, and they jumped up as soon as I turned the knob. I guess the watcher realized what I did. About 30 seconds passed, and I heard a couple more crunches, then a very loud thud. If you've ever heard a vinyl fence being smacked against, it's a bit distinctive, and I knew they'd jumped it. My dogs finally went nuts, and I ran to the window near the thud, lights off and blinds closed there, thankfully. I caught a quick glimpse of a leg disappearing behind the corner of my neighbor's house. I stayed up until dawn with my metal baseball bat and one of those giant sharp grill forks. With the fence and dogs, I always felt safe. How they got back there so quietly, I'll never know. I've lived here my whole life and never had anything happen, so this has shaken me. Whoever that was wanted me to know they were there and definitely wanted my attention. I've since installed multiple cameras and motion lights all around the perimeter of my house. It's been quiet since. I feel better, but that illusion of safety has all but disappeared. God, that is so scary and like my worst nightmare. One time when I was around 12, I was watching TV in my living room with my father. It was late around midnight. Our living room had a big picture window, and our curtains were not shut all the way, just about 6-inch gap in the middle. I looked up from the TV to see a man in a baseball cap and dark sunglasses peek in on us, very creepy like. I was so scared, but thank God my whole family was home. My dad looked but didn't find anyone, and we called the police to do a patrol of our neighborhood, but never found anyone. I'm 43 years old, and to this day I can't have any window blinds or windows open at night. I always feel like someone is watching me. There had been evidence at my friend's house of someone lurking around or attempting to break in. Footprints in the snow by the window, men's size shoe. We were young teenage girls. One night, 3 of us were sleeping on the couch. I'm in the basement when I heard tapping on the window. I was the only one who woke up. I was sick of wondering who it was, so I went over to the window and pulled the blinds. So now whoever was there could see us, but all I could see was darkness and my reflection. When my brother came to pick me up shortly after, he looked around, but whoever it was long gone. Months later, my friend looked out her window to the bush behind her house, and she saw a man on a ladder against a tree staring into her room. Her stepdad chased him off, but he was never caught. Apparently, the ladder had been stolen out of her neighbor's shed. Around that same time, her neighbor's house was broken into, and whoever it was had attempted arson to burn it down. Dear all, I am a first-timer as far as posting here goes, but I would like to tell you about my irrational fear of the elderly. I haven't checked whether there is a registered phobia like this out there, but I have definitely been affected by it. A little backstory. Since my childhood, I was told I have a very vivid imagination. So among my first memories, there are old buildings and in their basements. There are people with white painted faces trying to lure me down, don't ask. Now, I am from Eastern Europe, so there are these typical houses in big cities that have been having these dizzy effects on me since my childhood. In 2002, for example, my parents told me I seemed as if I was about to faint when we were visiting a friend who was living in one of these types of houses. My parents, not being superstitious, were also kind of shocked to see what could have triggered this state of mind. I will tell you later why this might be of importance. Later, I sort of discovered one of these houses when I was quite drunk to face my fears. I started from the cellar up to the attic. It was like a proper horror movie, going from the cellars up to the attic, through the dusty objects that you couldn't tell whether they are real or the figments of your imagination and or you being drunk. Fast forward to the present. I had a breakup with my ex, so I was in need of finding a flat ASAP. I found one relatively quickly in a posher part of town. A nice, tranquil neighborhood with young parents and old people. There are also playgrounds, cafes, and restaurants, so we can conclude this is an ideal area for anyone who is looking for peace. Like I told you before, I was after a breakup, so I went out quite a lot. I had my share of alcohol, but never did I experience any unpleasant situation as far as old people or houses go. Having quite a lot of free time on my own, I started watching series or movies to kill time. What I first started was Netflix's Marion. If you don't know the story, no problem. But it is about a possessed old woman. If you Google her, you would get the idea of what I am talking about when I tell you my new neighbor eerily resembles her. Because one afternoon she knocked on my door telling me that her son was coming home. Yes, this was the icebreaker in the conversation. I politely nodded to that. And then I introduced myself and told her I was the guy who was going to rent this flat. A couple of weeks went by. I was minding my own business when my doorbell rang. It was her. All right. And she wanted me to check her cable TV, so, being a nice neighbor, I said, sure, let us check. So we proceeded into her flat. If I have to describe her place, it was out of a Hoarders episode. The stench, the litter, the everything. After all, she is not that old. She could take care of her business if she was all right. But as I was taking a look around, she was not all right. The TV was on. It was a summer afternoon, but the air was filled with impending death. She couldn't locate the remote control among her stuff. The room was so filthy, so I couldn't help and said sorry and left. Another couple of days passed by, and sometimes I met her on the street. Sometimes I smelled the stench coming from behind her door. But I am in my mid-30s, so why should I be afraid? I had a job as a night watchman at a home for the elderly before, but that's another creepy story. Anyhow, after a night of light drinking, prior to this virus, I went home. I was a bit tipsy, but nothing serious. A movie was on, and I remember listening to some music. Mind you, this is a quiet and rich neighborhood, so I was quite taken aback when I heard, "Open up, police," through my headphones. I listened. Then again, "Open up the door." I couldn't quite tell at which door they were yelling. I opened the door and saw two police officers. I introduced myself and asked them if I could help. They thanked and told me that the old lady can't come out and locked herself up in her flat. Now, you have to know that the doors on my floor are U-shaped, meaning I have a neighbor to my right, the lady, and there is another neighbor opposite to me, a family. Back to the story. The door of the old lady was open, but the barred safety door in front of her entrance door was locked. You could see inside the apartment as the light was slowly eaten by the darkness and the stench. The two police officers went into the family's apartment because, as it turned out, there is an interconnected part between the two flats, where the police officers could climb into the old lady's apartment. So they did. The reason why I wrote this whole story is that I was left alone on the floor, being able to gaze inside the old lady's apartment. If you saw the movie Wreck 2, you know the apartment I am talking about. I got my phone and started recording for I don't know why. But I heard something that I would never want to hear again. From the darkness, an almost animal-like howling, which was the mixture of human and something not human. I still have it recorded. It was so chilling and disturbing that I have goosebumps writing about it. The POS concluded that the lady had forgotten to take their pills. She should be in a psychiatric institution, and that's why she was having nightmares and was half conscious of what was happening. Nobody knows if she has or had a son. At least this is what people who I asked told me. Since then I see her frequently, sometimes standing on the staircase, like waiting for somebody. It is really creepy. I understand that the series Marion has added some fear value to this old lady, but believe me, it is an event that I had been trying to avoid in my whole life. I also understand that the old building and old people have an obvious connection, but I was curious if somebody else might have these sensations or experiences. Thank you very much for reading this story. Stay safe. Way back in the 90s, when I was a teenager, I was babysitting a couple kids that were regulars. The kids had long since been put to bed, and I was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, with the corner-mounted TV on for background noise. Across from the table was a glass patio door with vertical blinds that I hadn't quite turned all the way. As I'm sitting there, I see a reflection of something walk past the kitchen behind me. I gather up my courage and look around the corner and see nothing. I grab the cordless phone, dial 91, and am prepared to hit the last one if something is in the house. I turn back around and see one of the kids I was babysitting standing there staring at me, not making a sound. I asked her what she was doing up. No response, just staring. I ushered her back down the hall to bed. That is the night I learned that she sleepwalks, and to always close the blinds all the way. I live in a zero-lot line home. My neighbor right next to me is a creepy old man. He always tries to watch when I come and go. Our parking spots are right next to each other, and there's an alley behind us. We share a parking slab. We both have decks at the back of the house that leads to our parking. I've caught him hanging out on his back patio waiting for me to get home. He's even stalked me at my work. He's too old for me, and to think that I would even be interested in him is crazy. The worst thing is, he's a retired attorney. He should know better than to stalk a woman at their work. Thank goodness my work took it seriously, and campus police have him on alert. I work at a private college, and we were able to check he has no business being there. I now park my car at the front of my house, so I don't have to bump into him when I get home. My front door has a keyless entry, so I don't have to fiddle with keys to get inside. It sucks when your neighbor is a creeper. I finally get to tell my Matrix story. The first house I lived in by myself had 3 neighbors who did anything of significance while I lived there. The neighbor to the north was a sweet lady who sometimes asked if her kids could play in my backyard. The neighbor to the south was constantly doing renovations. The neighbor to the west, across the street from me, was the weird one. There was this loud family that lived there for the first year I was there. The kids were loud, and so were the adults. At the end of my first year in this house, they decided to move out for some reason or another. They were not particularly friendly, so I didn't find out why. After they left, I rarely saw the same car and the same people at that house. This made me think this house is either a crack house or an Airbnb, and I was hoping for the latter. One sweltering summer evening without AC, I was sitting in my living room playing video games when I heard the strangest noise coming from outside. I looked out and saw this Mini Cooper pulling up to this house at like 60 miles per hour and screeching to a stop in the driveway. If it was a big car, it might have been intimidating, but since it was a Mini Cooper, it sounded more pathetic. This dude it if you will, hops out and starts yelling and cursing and pounding on the door. Another guy, Dude B, opens the door and starts yelling at the dude who pulled up. They get into each other's faces shouting, "No, you're the mother F." A lady comes to the door and is shouting at Dude A. Dude A pushes his way inside and closes the door behind him. A few minutes later, they all come out, still shouting at each other, with Dude B carrying a bunch of boxes and shoving them into the Mini Cooper. Dude A and the chick are still shouting at each other, and Dude B is shouting over his shoulder. Dude A flips them both off and hops into his car and books it down the road. But again in a Mini Cooper, so it was more comedic than dramatic. An hour later, almost on the dot, I hear the high-pitched engine of the Mini Cooper barreling down the street. My first thought was, well, shit, this guy is so pissed at those two that he went and got a gun and is about to off them. He pulled up just as before and went into the same tirade. The scene played out exactly as before, everything. He walked up, pounded on the door, Dude A and Dude B shouting at each other. "No, you're the mother F," Dude A pushing his way inside. The whole thing was copied point for point, like someone just copied the scene the first time and pasted it back in an hour later. It was a strange glitch in the Matrix moment. I'm a 28-year-old female. Have you ever felt totally afraid, like your body tenses up and you feel your stress hormones preparing you to flee when in the company of a random stranger with no apparent threatening characteristics, including subtleties? I'll give you a couple examples. There is a family friend of my parents who has always been completely normal and kind and has never done anything that warranted a fear response in me. However, every time I've seen him maybe 5 times my whole life, I shiver, feel instantly nauseous, and then a little shameful for the stress it causes me. I always have to exit the room after a minute or so in his presence. He doesn't smell or anything, and I don't have any childhood trauma that could pinpoint this feeling I get. I honestly feel guilty about it. I can't explain it, and I know I must have looked crazy. Over the years, I've had these feelings about other people, both men and women, a handful of times. Just last year, I got the same icky feeling about a woman I was standing next to on the train. She was in her mid-30s, looked very normal and well. Average and plain in every way that I could tell by glancing at her. The point is, she didn't look threatening by any stretch of the imagination. My body reacted with that same nausea, and my immediate psychological reaction was fear, just like it had been several times before with random people. I got off the train and didn't think about it again before I saw her again on the same train months later. It was late, like 1 a.m., and I could have sworn the ugly feeling came over me before I even saw her. I moved carriages away from her when I noticed her nearby me. She did not notice me or even look over. She got off at the last stop and exited the train before turning around. And looking straight at me, she smiled. How sinister is that? This was not a typical friendly smile. There were only 3 other people on the train other than me, so I know she was looking right at me. She continued smiling and staring until she was no longer in sight as the train moved away. I panicked and had to steady myself by holding onto the bar while clutching my chest to try to re-regulate normal breathing. Today, it still makes me shiver. Has anyone had this happen to them before? I really don't ever want to meet anyone else that makes me feel that way again, even though I know it's inevitable. Thoughts, experiences related to this. Am I overreacting? I'm not normally an over-paranoid person, and 99% of the time I have perfectly normal and pleasant interactions with others. A bipolar FBI agent. He would be the friendliest person one day, then look at you like he wanted to kill you the next. We lived in a new development in the country. 6 houses on the street. He and his wife had invited me and mine over for dinner a month after they moved in. We were 28 and 27, ambitious and successful for our ages. He and his were probably mid-30s. We reluctantly did, then offered to return the favor. When they were over a month later, he asked for a tour and basically scoured all the rooms. Commented on my brand of shampoo for FS sake. He would give you the darkest looks. He once stopped me as I was driving past his house to mine as I'm coming home from work. Stuck his head in and looked around inside my car before addressing me. He lived directly next door. I've never had anything to hide, and he'd randomly treat you like you were suspicious for no reason. Several times he'd knock, and when you answered the door, he'd just walk in like he owned the place, then ask for an egg, flour, or something because his wife was cooking and missing the ingredient, as he's looking around. The 3rd time he did this, I lost my internal shit and was an ass to him. Like, here's the egg and there's the door. Bye. When the FBI reassigned him to a different city, and he finally moved. The rest of the neighborhood got to know each other over the next month. Turns out nobody wanted to be caught outside when he lived there. We all lived with this FBI psycho for 3 years, and he had creeped everyone out. We all became friends and had block parties almost every weekend of the summers after he moved. In a way, we all had shared trauma from this nutbag with a badge. I used to be a police dispatcher for 10 years. It's amazing how many prowlers are out there. We used to call them peeping toms or weenie waggers. Anyway, some would step it up a notch and enter the home. We had one guy who would sneak into people's homes and stand at the foot of their bed and watch them sleep. The residents would wake up to this guy dressed in black watching them. Look into a product called a scat mat on Amazon. It's for pets, but I guarantee when you either step on it or put your weight on it, it will hurt a human, and you can put it on your windowsill. I got it in white so that it blends into the white paint. It'll give you some notice if your windows get breached. The other device is a doorstop, but has a built-in alarm. I use it when traveling. It sets off such a piercing alarm, and it blocks the door very well. Unfortunately, my creepy ex-boyfriend stalked me, and I had to deal with a lot of fear for years. He was very violent and looked like a creep. He lived behind my parents' home for a few months, and then behind my new home that I share with my daughter and husband for a couple of weeks. He was a horrible and abusive person. He slashed my parents' tires and mine. After I found out everything, he actually texted me from a couple of different numbers, talking about how he watched both my parents leave their house or come outside at night for whatever reason. He left so much stuff behind both of our houses. My female neighbor and I have actually talked about smelling cigarettes through our windows very late at night, just as recently as last week. but I'm pretty sure my ex is in prison now. I was sitting in my recliner last night, which is by a window, when I heard a man's voice just outside whisper, however, a very loud sort of shouting whisper, as one would use to scold a child in church. Yo, he's still awake. I am a strong guy and do have the means to protect myself, but in my vulnerable state, I felt true fear. I froze for a few seconds, then got up and looked out the window, but saw nothing. My house is in a heavily wooded area, so they could have gotten to the forest before I got to the window. The blinds were closed, but not shut. So, yeah, it just freaked me out. I am going to adopt a dog today from the animal shelter right now because I need a friend to watch my back and give me that heads up when he hears them the next time they come. However, I just want to say it's rare I feel every hair on my body rise in terror. He never became our neighbor, thank God. But there was an apartment me and my then new wife were looking at to rent. When we were walking up the driveway, a scruffy middle-aged guy stepped out in a robe on a second-floor balcony and started snapping pictures of us. It was very uncomfortable, but we were too young to know if it was appropriate to say tell him to stop. When the landlord met us at the front door, we asked about the man taking pictures of us, and he replied, "Oh, he's just a bit eccentric, don't worry about him," and continued to show us the rental. When we left, we again saw and could hear the balcony man taking pictures of us. We never called back about renting the place, for obvious reasons. When I was younger, we lived in a house where my sister's window was facing the outside of the front yard. It had a small tree in front, so it an easy place to hide within the dark. For months, she claimed that someone would be outside her window, but by the time my mom would be there to check, they would be gone. Fast forward almost a year later, I'm on the phone and my mom bangs on my door asking who that guy is outside my window. By the way, my window is facing the backyard. I looked at her confused and she walks to the shades, pulls it up really fast, and because my lights were on, we couldn't see much, but we hear someone frantically jumping the fence, slamming their screen door and locking it. It was definitely our creepy neighbor that was a local bus driver who lived with his mom. Growing up, I had a next-door neighbor who was super creepy, but I never really was able to put my finger on why. That is, until my best friend, who lived up the street, hit early puberty and developed DD boobs at 12, and we caught him hiding in the bushes watching us jump on the trampoline in my backyard after a day at the pool. Currently, it's the guy who lives behind us who definitely dabbles in hard substances on occasion. My husband and I were getting ready for bed one night and noticed that our neighbor was jumping side to side behind his shed with a flashlight. We assumed he was trying to scare off a raccoon or something, didn't think much of it, until 30 minutes later when my husband got up to go to the bathroom again and the neighbor was still jumping side to side with the flashlight. He also started building a fence almost a year ago, but has since just slapped random bits and pieces from other types of fences onto it, because he apparently can't buy any more wood for it, as he told me one day. So we have a structure of wood, chain link, and wrought iron that lives on our property line, and it is the worst. I had an apartment adjacent to this guy that was constantly doing nutty stuff. He lived with his brother and his elderly mother. He would throw random objects off his back balcony, a mattress, a bicycle. I'd sit on my balcony and watch him yell and kick and punch at the signs that were posted in the parking lot. Once he broke a chunk of marble off his kitchen counter, opened his front door, and tossed at my roommate's dad's head. It missed but hit the van parked there and dented it. He was always leaving his door open just a crack and shouting stuff when we were coming home. He would sit in the pool and stare at people, and I'm pretty sure play with himself in the corner. We told the office all the time. They didn't kick him out until he started stalking an office girl, leaving her notes that might have been death threats, if I'm remembering correctly. We were two 20-year-old girls, so it got scary for us sometimes. I called the cops twice. I'm pretty sure he was schizophrenic and his poor brother was having to care for him and his mother. The brother once apologized to me and said, "They've switched his meds around, so I know there was something mental going on." I had a downstairs neighbor who would complain about all the banging my husband and I were making running around our apartment. Thing is, we are the most boring, sedentary people. We were just sitting at our computer desks in complete silence most of the time. We never had people over, never ran or stomped, never made any ruckus of any kind. Initially, he only complained to the management office. But after a while, he would regularly wait underneath our stairs, so he could ambush me with accusations as I took out the trash. In a different apartment building, a few years later, two kitties followed me home one night, so I put some food out for them. Then my next-door neighbor threw bleach on them and screamed at me for feeding strays. I called animal services on her, but since the kittens ran away, there was no proof she actually did any damage to them. The same woman carried a long stick outside every morning, so she could swing it at any stray cats near her car. When I lived in a small Philly neighborhood row home, we had a next-door neighbor, let's call him Pat. Pat was batchet crazy. Here's some of the weird things he did. He smoked all the time. I never saw him without a cigarette in his hand. He had walking pneumonia and his doctor told him he needed to stop smoking to recover. Pat said F that. In the 2 years that we lived next to each other, he must have had 8 different cars. He said that the FBI kept taking them. Pat claimed to own every bar on Main Street, but was constantly broke. Pat asked us for money, 20 at a time. We'd give him a $20. He'd dodge us for a few days, then give us the money back. A day or two later, he'd be back for another 20. One day, he came back with a softball-sized ball of cash. He slipped us a 20 out of the ball and said, "Never lend me money again," and he never asked after that. That's when we realized Pat was probably into some shady stuff. One day, there was a knock on the front door. I opened it to see a guy, 6'5", probably 250 pounds of muscle. Looked like he could have killed me in one punch. He said, "I'm looking for Pat." Then he leaned in super close and whispered, "The electrician." I pointed him next door, but it felt like he was asking for drugs. Pat was constantly stalked by Red Jeep guy RJG would sit out back in his Jeep for hours waiting for Pat to come home. He had a few verbal altercations with this guy about money. Finally, we were grilling on the deck out back, and we saw this blue Mazda circling our back lot, driving around in a circle over and over again for like 2 hours. When Pat came home, the Mazda pulled up, rolled down the window. The person inside made a call and floored it out. No idea who it was. Pat left within the week, dumped all his garbage. Crap from his house and multiple mattresses, which got infested with rats in his back lawn. It got so bad the city sent a cleanup crew to pitchfork all the mattresses into a trash truck. I probably forgot many other weird occurrences. I'll always wonder what Pat is up to. A hoarding mother in her 60s living with her adult son had to move out due to foreclosure. They left behind everything just up and left. What they left behind was telling. Notably, they didn't have running water. So the crew who were cleaning the house out found jars upon jars of human waste and urine in the basement. Secondly, the backyard was an overgrown forest. When it came time for the new owners to remodel and re-landscape, they found a World War grenade buried. The surrounding homes had to be evacuated until the bomb squad showed up. Today, it's an Airbnb for bachelorette and college football parties on the weekend. I lived on the top floor of a 3-story apartment building, and an older gentleman lived on the ground floor, across the hallway. He was a sweet old man, kind of a drunk on the weekends, and tried to work hard, though I believed he was sick with something that regular doctor visits couldn't fix. He moved a woman in with him for a month who was an absolute terror. She drank, did drugs, and I'm pretty sure she was sleeping with him. They had fights with her sister on the lawn, in which I called the police, and it seemed like the entire department showed up. She had one child who was taken from her in the middle of the day by police and a CPS worker due to living conditions. She would stand on the entrance porch of the building with a bottle of alcohol and scream obscenities at random people, including children walking or driving by. Our landlord finally evicted the old man because he broke the subletting clause in the rental contract. It was a wild month. A few years ago, neighbor was writing my 9-year-old son notes. Found a note with his phone number under my son's pillow. Also found a love note on my car, where I parked to commute, miles from my house. We moved. Another one. 20 years ago, my neighbor was peeping on me. Could feel weird vibes sometimes at night. Went outside my window and found a stick pushed through the screen so he could move the blinds and watch me. Landlord wouldn't do anything. Cops said he had to be caught in the act. I moved. When I was 8-9 years old, an elderly lady lived alone on the ground floor of my building. Sometimes I would come home from school and my mother had gone shopping or whatever, so I waited at the door for her to arrive. It was a friendly neighborhood and I never waited more than 5-10 minutes. This lady began to wait for me on the stairs and insisted that I can wait for my mother in her house. I told my mother and asked her to give me a key, but my mother didn't give it importance cause is an old lady. She isn't dangerous. Until one day, the lady again told me to go down to her house. I said no, as always, and she grabbed me by the arm and started dragging me towards the stairs. I was a skinny but strong girl, so she had a hard time moving, and then my mother arrived. My mum pulled me and slapped the woman who almost knocked her down the stairs. Then she went into the house and called the police and my dad. I don't remember much of what happened afterwards, but the lady never came near me again. When she saw me, she turned around. I had a neighbor who mowed over his gravel driveway, which sent rocks flying and broke 2 of my windows. I went to confront him, and all I really wanted was an apology. The guy went totally crazy. He was yelling at me and said I broke my own windows. The neighbor on the other side of me had come out to confront him about a rock hitting his window as well. The crazy guy said he must have broken his own window as well. Crazy guy called the cops on us with the broken windows. The cops came to talk to me, 19 female, and asked if I threatened him 50-ish M. I said no, he was the one who had threatened me and the other neighbor. They left and went have questioned the other neighbor. They came back after a few minutes and said the good neighbor had confirmed my story. They asked if I wanted to press charges, but instead I just asked for my windows to be replaced. The cops told the crazy guy to replace my windows or go to jail. My windows were placed pretty quick. I used to rent a townhouse. And the neighbor next to us would open his door and just make awkward small talk with us, literally any time we were coming or going from the house. I'm not exaggerating in the slightest. Pretty sure he was sitting staring out the window all day long waiting for us. One time he told me he was an orphan. This man was at least 65 years old. Then asked if I grew up in this random city like 30 minutes away from where we lived. Just picked a place and threw a dart at it, I guess. I said nope, I actually grew up here, just down the road. He said, "Oh, you must have known my father then. He taught at blah blah school." I said nope. Name doesn't sound familiar. He said, well, he retired in 1970, died in 1982. I wasn't even born yet. When we were moving in, we had friends helping us, and next thing I know, this man is just standing in my living room. Just followed my buddies into the house. He would also walk behind our shared backyard and stare into my sliding glass door all the time, to the point where we had to keep the shades closed at all times on every window. Someone told me sometime after we moved out he was institutionalized. We lived in a duplex at the time, so there was just a wall between us and this guy. If he heard any noise such as the dog going down the stairs, he pounded on the wall. If he heard any noise after that, he called the police. The cops once showed up to find us playing Monopoly. It didn't take long for them to realize he was wasting their time, but they were obligated to come out. He also had 2 little dogs that he would walk without letting them stop. Poor things just had to poop while walking, leaving a trail that he wouldn't pick up. Once, he shoveled our sidewalk without asking or being asked, then tried to demand payment. This is an ongoing situation, so please bear with me. So, a little background. My family owns a farm with a few businesses on the property, an ice cream shop, farm store, etc. And we have lots of land and various barns and outbuildings on the property. This isn't a quiet, affluent community in New England. Small town kind of deal where the cops work really hard to give out speeding tickets. I'm sure you get the picture. To the right of our property is a duplex that is designated as low-income housing. In my state, each town and city is required to offer a certain percentage of housing as such. We have always gotten along with our neighbors, both in the duplex and on the other side. Recently, however, our sweet long-term neighbors who lived on the side of the duplex closest to us moved out of state. The new folks that moved in there are really, really creepy. So far, we have caught them in our tractor barn at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, walking around in our driveway at 2 a.m., spray painting what looks like a gang sign on every telephone pole in the vicinity, and they hang random raw chicken parts from string in a tree in their yard. Additionally, some of the kids have been caught shooting their BB guns at our store after closing, thank goodness. They don't really seem to understand boundaries, as we have politely told them that ours is private property, and to please not trespass, but they still do. There seems to be a lot more people living in the duplex than the lease agreement states. I believe 4 people is the maximum. There are at least 2 guys in their mid-30s, always dressed in wife beaters and basketball shorts. There are at least 4 kids, ranging in age from 2-ish up to early teens. I've seen one woman on the property, who I assume is the mother of some of the kids. I'm afraid of coming off as a snob, but I am also worried about these people. They are weird, like really, really weird. It's a bit unnerving to have them next door, as we keep chickens, ducks, and goats on the farm as pets. Any suggestions of how to deal with this all? I just randomly remembered or thought about it for the first time in a while and thought it would be fitting for here. For context, the apartments I lived in at the time had 8 units total. There were 2 buildings with 4 units each. The bottom ones you had to walk down about 6 steps. They weren't ground level. And the upper ones you had to walk up about 6 stairs, also not ground level. The two buildings faced each other with a sidewalk pathway and a little courtyard in between the two buildings. All 8 units' living room windows faced the courtyard area. I lived in one of the upper units. It was also at the end of a residential street, so not of people or traffic coming through. So this happened in November 2013. I had literally just brought my newborn son home from the hospital. He was on a Billy SP, bed for jaundice, and needless to say, I was already a nervous wreck. The second night I had him home, I hear a knock at my door around 11 p.m. I looked through the peephole, and there was a woman standing at my door, and I know she wasn't one of my neighbors. No way in hell was I answering because I had my newborn, my 4-year-old daughter, and their dad, who is absolutely not a tough guy lol. She knocked for about 5 minutes and stopped. I went and checked the peephole, and she was gone. For whatever reason, I peeked through the blinds, and this lady was standing in the courtyard just staring up at my window. Evidently, she saw me because she came back to the door and started knocking again. At this point, my baby daddy suggested maybe her car was stuck, or she was stranded and needed to use a phone. I wasn't having it and didn't answer because why would she not go to the neighbors' doors? And why would she stand in the middle of the courtyard in a snowstorm staring at my window after I didn't answer the door? It didn't end there. The next night around the same time, I hear another knock at the door, but this one was pounding hard like a cop. Went and checked the peephole, and it was covered. I stood at the peephole for a minute watching, and the person took his hand off the peephole. His head was down so I couldn't see his face, but he pounded on the door again and covered the peephole back up with his hand. Baby daddy chalked it up to it being one of the neighbors' friends messing with them and got the wrong apartment. But I was sufficiently creeped out and once again didn't answer the door. I wish I had a resolution to this story, but nothing ever came of it. I didn't call the cops and it never happened again. I still think about it a lot though, wondering if it was a coincidence or if they knew each other and were planning something sinister, and what would have happened if I'd answered the door to either of them. It's a small town. I was living in a fairly secluded area. I'm also a very private person, and not many people aside from family and really close friends knew where I lived. The people that did know where I lived knew damn well if you didn't call or text to let me know you were coming, the door wasn't getting answered. The burning question is always who the hell were these people and what did they want? I've really been wanting to share this story for some time now, but haven't really found a good outlet for it until stumbling across this sub. The other people involved don't really like talking about it. It's upsetting and doesn't make us look good, but I just think it's a great awful story at this point. Sorry, this is going to be a long one. Names changed to protect personal info. About 5 years ago, my wife and I went on a weekend camping trip with our 2 closest friends, another married couple. The campsite is just outside of Yosemite and absolutely beautiful. The beauty of it and creepiness of it is that you take a dirt road for about an hour and a half off the main road to get to it. It's extremely secluded, but never felt threatening. It's a really popular campsite, so there were always people around, especially in the summer when this occurred. The first day was awesome. I don't remember exactly what we did, but I remember having a great time. The campsites are all fairly close together, and usually separated by various shrubs, etc. I remember we were all pretty pumped about the site we got, as there were no neighbors on one side, just forest, and no one occupying the site closest to us. This is uncommon, as these campgrounds stay fully booked throughout the summer. Day 2 started normally. We had breakfast, then headed to the lake for a couple hours. The lake was about a 20-minute hike from the main campground. When we got back around 2-ish, we noticed that the site next to us now had a silver rental car parked on it. We didn't think much of it and went about making a fire to cook with. At some point we noticed the occupant of the site next to us, a pretty average-looking white dude, maybe early 40s. Honestly, he was so average-looking that it's hard to even picture him. We all immediately caught on to the fact that he was constantly looking over at us. My friend Dave even made a comment to me under his breath. "You notice this guy keeps looking over here." I remember feeling a little uncomfortable, as we were all still in bathing suits from the lake, but made a conscious effort to ignore it. It's worth mentioning that we were a little buzzed or drunk. Not out of control or anything, just feeling pretty good. Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, we continued to notice the guy constantly looking over at us. In hindsight, Dave, or I should have called him out. This story doesn't make us look great, but whatever. I had been stressed at work prior to the trip, and really didn't want to let some creepy dude throw off my relaxed vibe. Stupid, I know. The alcohol, coupled with the fact that we honestly kind of felt bad for him, led us to not confront him. Yes, it was very creepy, but I told myself he was just an awkward, lonely dude. Aside from the staring, there were a couple of mildly weird incidents that occurred leading up to the very weird stuff. The first was that, at some point, he left his site to go do whatever. While he was gone, a girl, probably in her mid-20s our age, walked by and snapped a picture of his license plate. I remember asking her if she needed anything, and she smiled awkwardly and kept walking. Dave and I both thought this was odd, but were preoccupied with beer. Later into the evening, around 7-ish, the camp host was doing her rounds checking people in. She checked us in and moved on to him. I remember us all eavesdropping intently to hear what they were saying. I think we just wanted to hear what this creep sounded like. He kept asking questions about the bathhouse. We didn't know there was a bathhouse, or even what a bathhouse was, but he had like 100 different questions about it. Where is it? How late is it open? Is it private? Maybe not that weird, but in context, definitely odd. The sun started to go down. We were all drunk, so we weren't too concerned with creepy dude anymore. At one point we went for a walk and noticed him snooping around what we believed to be the bathhouse. Now I would call out this kind of behavior, but again, I was drunk and 5 years stupider at the time. We all laughed and talked about how creepy he was. Back at the site, we continued to drink and have a good time. At one point, the guy started eating beans aggressively out of a can in the light of his single lantern, no fire. He looked us while doing it, and Dave and I kind of snickered to each other at how weird it was. I don't think the girls noticed. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. I think the guy had left his site at this point. I kind of remember us making jokes like, "I better not wake up to that dude looking in our window, haha." My wife and I slept in our SUV with the seats folded down. Dave and Sarah slept in the camper shell of their truck. I remember feeling a little creeped out as I fell asleep, but shrugged it off. At around 2:30 a.m., both my wife and I were jolted awake by we thought was a woman's scream. We both looked at each other and asked if the other had heard that. We came to the conclusion that it was probably people at some other site being loud, and decided to go back to sleep. As I was trying to go back to sleep, I started feeling very unsettled. I decided to get out of the car and take a look around. I cracked my door, trying to be as quiet as possible. I had gotten about one leg out of the car when I heard faint but direct whispering coming from Dave and Sarah's camper shell about 4 feet away. I froze and then heard it again. I eventually realized that they were trying to tell me something. I whispered back, "What?" I then very clearly heard Dave say, "Start you car." I instantly realized that something was wrong, so rather than ask questions, I climbed back into my car to start it. Right away, Dave and Sarah bursted out the back of the camper and frantically jumped into my car. They told me to drive. They were too freaked out to explain anything, so I just drove kind of aimlessly. Eventually, I pulled over, figuring we were far enough away from whatever had freaked them out. Finally, Sarah calmed down enough to tell us what had happened. As she put it, she was woken by a light coming from creepy dude's campsite. Apparently, he had set up lanterns and flashlights to spotlight himself, completely naked, masturbating in the direction of our cars. She also mentioned that he was flaccid and not able to finish. A gross detail, but I feel it's important. It gets weirder. At some point, he stoked and turned off the lights and began using a flashlight to signal across a small ravine that the campsite's backed up to. I'm talking like Morse code or something. Across the ravine, an old RV began using its headlights to signal back. Dave was awake by this point. I questioned them on this detail, and they both said it was very clear that they were communicating. After that, he turned off his light. Keep in mind, it is absolutely pitch black out there at night. After a few minutes, they heard footsteps around their car, followed by a hard tap on the window. That is what caused Sarah to scream, hence, waking me up. At this point, I decided that we needed to call the police. The problem was, there was absolutely zero cell service at the campsite. Furthermore, it was about an hour and a half up a service road from what was already a very remote part of the state, so leaving at night wasn't an option. We decided the best course of action was to alert the camp host. We drove around, and eventually found the trailer she lived in. She was understandably confused to be woken up at 3:30 in the morning, but was responsive. She mentioned that the guy was really weird when she checked him in, and called the police on her satellite phone. Apparently, there was massive wildfire burning that weekend, and the police said they wouldn't be able to send anyone out until sunrise. The camp host said there really wasn't anything she could do beyond calling the police. It really sucked hearing that. Basically, we were stuck in our car in the pitch blackness, while some crazy masturbating dude was out and about. Not to mention whoever was in that RV. One more really weird thing happened. At around 4 a.m., we were all still sitting in my car when a man in a hood walked right up to the window. The second I noticed him, I turned on my engine and headlights. He ran off into the trees. We all sat in my car until sunrise. Once his was light out, we went back to the site to pack up our things. His car was still there, with blankets hung in all the windows. The whole thing just felt gross, and we wanted to get the hell out of there, so we quickly packed up and left. A couple of hours after we left, I got a call from the police. They said they went out to the campsite and questioned the guy. He said he was simply showering. The cop told me there was nothing he could do. It was our word against his. He also questioned the people in the RV. They said they didn't know what he was talking about, but mentioned that, and I quote, "A very rude camper screamed in the middle of the night." The whole experience with the police was frustrating. I tried following up. I even tried getting help from a family member who's a sheriff, but even he said there wasn't anything they could do, unless that particular police chief really wanted to investigate this guy. So that's the story. I learned a lesson about being polite when someone is making you uncomfortable. Nowadays, I am much more aggressive with creepy people. I also know it's easy to hear this story and wonder why Dave or myself didn't just confront the guy, especially when he's literally masturbating at the car you're sleeping in. I don't know. I wish we would have showed more courage, but honestly, it was really scary in the moment. I'm okay with admitting that. Now I think it's kind of funny just how stupid we were and how bizarre the whole situation was. I also feel fortunate that no one was hurt. Clearly, we were dealing with a very messed up individual who had accomplices. I can only imagine what their end goal was and what they would have been capable of doing. I also think that they had done shit like this before. I just really wish the police could have done something. My next-door neighbors are creeps, or at least one of them is. The people who live directly next to me. On the other side of the fence in our yard is a pair of older women. We assume they're a couple. Last summer, when my boyfriend was building our outdoor shower, one of the old ladies would watch us through the fence because she didn't like the noise of us hammering nails. During 4th of July, she paced up and down the fence with a drum because she didn't like the loud fireworks. The morning after the 4th, she picked all of the debris out of her yard and lined it up on the fence. She has done this 2 4th of Julys in a row minus the drums. Just a couple days ago, we were having a fire in our fire pit, and she tried to get our roommate's attention to have us put out the fire, and when we didn't, she stood off in her yard, staring over the fence. I can see over the fence from my boyfriend and mine's bedroom, so I spotted her through the window and we made eye contact. She moved a little further into her own yard and behind some trees like she was hiding. I spotted her a second time through the trees a few minutes later, and then she left to go back into her house. This is 100% true. So, I live in a small block of flats alone in England. I have lived here for about 2 years. Last year, a young couple and their newborn baby moved in next door. They seemed nice, but on the whole, I kept to myself, just exchanging passing neighborly pleasantries like hello and good evening. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I'm enjoying some alone time, if you get what I mean. And all of a sudden, I get a knock at my door. This freaks me out as it was 3 a.m. I quickly pause that evening's entertainment, cover up somewhat, and answer the door. It was my male neighbor in his dressing gown and visibly highly intoxicated. He then explains to me that he has lost his keys to his flat on the grass out front. Not thinking too much of it, I offered him assistance in finding the keys using my phone as a torch. Without luck, he then asked if he could come and sit inside my flat until his partner wakes up. Again, not thinking too much of it, I invited him in. After several awkward minutes, he asked if he could use the bathroom. With that, he takes himself to the bathroom and returns with his trousers still undone. This made me quite uncomfortable, and I informed him of the fact that his trousers were undone. Several more increasingly awkward minutes passed, and he informed me that he was watching me through my window enjoying my alone time, and he wanted to see if I wanted some company, to which I profusely declined. With that, I politely asked him to leave. On his way out, he asked me if I was sure I wouldn't like a blowjob. Again, I declined and hurried him out of the door, to where he begged me not to tell his partner, who was sleeping in the flat directly next door. Ever since, I've done my best to avoid seeing them. When I was about 10 years old, we lived next to a lady who was a bit strange. She had long black hair and really pale skin. She didn't come out of her house much, so we called her the vampire lady. We didn't know her name because she was so quiet, but whenever someone walked by her house, she would always stare at them. The lady's house always looked dark inside, even at night, and sometimes my mom or brothers saw strange things happening there. We weren't sure what was going on. We just noticed weird lights flickering like in a horror movie about Frankenstein. One night, my friend Jess came for a sleepover. I told Jess about the weird lady across the street. Jess thought it would be a good idea to go see what was happening in the house when everyone else was asleep. I didn't really want to, but I said yes. I knew we had to be super quiet because my mom wakes up easily. She wouldn't let me go out in the dark at my age. Somehow, we sneaked outside without making any noise. Now we just had to cross the street to get to the house. Jess tried to look inside through the windows, and as soon as she did, she grabbed my arm. "Come on, let's go now," she said quietly but firmly. "What's wrong?" "We just got here," I asked as she pulled me, running back across the street. She didn't tell me what she saw until we were back inside the house. Once she locked the door, she said that when she looked through the window, she saw something that looked like a video camera with a small blinking light. I said we should just go to bed and talk about it in the morning. I wish I could say that's where the story ended, but it didn't. Around 3 in the morning, Jess and I were still trying to sleep when suddenly Jess started screaming. I had a bunk bed, so I climbed up to see what was happening. That's when I saw the camera lens from earlier now looking into our bedroom window. My mom and brothers rushed into my room with the lights on, which must have scared the person with the camera. So I told my mom that someone was looking inside. My mom grabbed a bat from my brother's room and went outside, looking around for a few minutes. When she came back, my mom asked us what the person looked like. Jess and I could only describe the camera lens. We didn't see the person, but in our hearts, we felt it was the lady from across the street, even though we didn't have any proof. My mom was mad that we waited until the morning to tell her how we knew it was the woman. Since then, we weren't allowed near her house, and I still sometimes have bad dreams about it. I recently moved to a condominium in a rural area because of cheaper living expenses. It's really hard to see the building since it's so hidden in the trees. I thought this was weird because I never really lived in such place, but a weirder thing happened a few weeks ago. So I live in a second floor of the building, and there are 2 or 3 neighbors living on that floor. One of them is an old man who generally takes care of the condo, and he gives me that creepy vibe to me. One time after I was done with my grocery shopping, I felt someone was staring at me from upstairs, so I briefly took a glimpse at it, and it was that old man who was watching me. I felt a little creeped out by him, but I told myself that it was probably nothing. So as I went upstairs with my grocery, he came out as if he purposely timed himself to have a small, friendly neighbor chat with me. I was being polite, so I did end up having the chat. After the convo ended, I went to my apartment unit a little chilled out from the experience and joking to my sibling about how he secretly may be a murderer. For instance, our unit trembles sometimes for no reason, so we joke about how he's burning corpses in a secret unit outside that we found for real whenever that happens. Honestly, he seems to be the person who has a little conversation with every neighbor, but I don't know why he gives me that creepy vibe. Hey, let me say that to whoever is reading this to be very weary of your neighbors. When I was 12, I used to go to a summer camp with my cousin who was 6 at the time. Let me backtrack a bit. My cousin is actually my mom's cousin because my grandmother's sister had her only kid, so even though I was older than her, she was my older cousin. We both frequented our great-grandmother's house and ventured to the camp from her house. Now there was an odd neighbor next to my great-grandmother's house, let's call him Mike. My family had told me that he was a creep and had a history of people uncomfortable in the neighborhood, to the point where people purposely avoided the street he lived on. Mike was also a man of very few words, and he was older, I'd say in his 50s, 60s, as he had visible gray hair. So one day me and my cousin Debbie, we'll call her Susan, were walking to the summer camp when I felt someone following us. So without alarming Susan, I quickly looked over my shoulder, and at first didn't see anything until I noticed Mike walk from behind the car. I quickened my pace and pulled Susan along and cut through a walkway to see him pick up the pace. I couldn't scare my cousin, so I kept moving, darting between different pathways while trying to outpace Mike. Knowing that I was a few minutes away from the camp, I told my cousin to go through the gates while I turned to confront him. He stopped and looked at me and turned back. I immediately reported this to my parents and Susan's mom. They confronted him, and he denied any wrongdoing, and we threatened to call the cops. Now it's 2020, and he's long dead, with his house being boarded up and tore down, a relic of a time period. Me and my cousin are both adult now, and that always haunts me, the fear of having to protect myself, and my cousin brought out the fight or flight response. Always watch your neighbors, you never know who's watching you. We really need to be cautious with people around us. In our old neighborhood, there's a new guy who rented the house in front of us. He's tall and look around like he's in his 40s, and I was 13 or 14 that time when we crossed paths. He would always go in my way purposely, even when he knows that I saw him already. One time, I was in a store, and he suddenly held my shoulders. I was really scared, and I shouted at him, and told him that he's stupid for doing that, and for always purposely crossing my path, even if he already saw me. He just laughed and told me it was a mistake, and one time I saw him in the mall, he still crossed my path again purposely. Good thing we left that neighborhood when I was 15. Some people are creepy, really, and thinks what they're doing is okay. When I lived in Tucson, I rented a home in a retirement community. I had a Harley Davidson and was living with my dog. A neighbor had a motorcycle as well, but was too old to ride and would stand outside and wave when I would ride by and take off. He lived just across from me. The neighbor next to him said he was a really nice guy and could use a friend and someone to help out from time to time with things, seeing as he was older and I was in my early 30s. One day I'm on my ladder cutting branches on my mesquite tree. He asks if I can swing by afterwards and cut a few of his branches as well. I gladly said yes. We got to chatting, and his wife of nearly 70 years had passed about 5 years prior, and he said he'd been sad and lonely without her. He also told me he was a teacher for many years before retiring. As we parted ways, he asked if I could come by sometime and help him plug in a Blu-ray player he had purchased. I told him no problem. I came by to help install the Blu-ray player a few days later, and he was making something to eat. He asked if I wanted to have a bite and if I was into whiskey. I told him I was an avid Jameson drinker in my 20s, so he poured me some whiskey on the rocks. As we had some Bertolli pasta before hooking up the Blu-ray player behind his TV that was hard to get to in an odd entertainment center, he asks me, "Do you like wrestling?" I have a good friend that lives near the base of MT. Lemon. He's about my age. Sometimes we have some of the younger guys over there, and he has mats in the house. Everyone takes off their shirts and pants and wrestles. It's a lot of fun. What the F? I told him that's not something I'm interested in. I became extremely uncomfortable. I decided to very quickly hook up the Blu-ray player so I could go home immediately. As I'm behind the TV and can't see him, he starts asking me if I enjoy watching pornography, that he has pornography videos on DVD that he can share with me. I almost smashed my head into the top of the entertainment center just as I was plugging in the HDMI cable, and he was asking me such a bizarre question. As quickly as humanly possible, I got out from behind the TV so I could see him and ensure I was safe from anything happening. Thankfully, he was just standing behind the couch, 15 feet away, watching while I finished. I told him, I'm not into that kind of thing. I've got to go. I quickly made a dash for the door and told him goodbye. From that point forward, I never interacted with him. My damn motorcycle was very loud, so every time I'd leave, which was often, he'd hear it, come outside and watch while I rode off waving at me. When I'd come home late in the evenings, I could see in his front window where his computer and monitor were, and I swore there were videos of women playing on his monitor with his blinds wide open while he sat there. I never stopped long enough to see very many specifics about what he was watching. Considering he was a teacher in his former life in Minnesota, his completely bizarre and disgusting questions really frightened me about whether or not he might have been involved with younger people in the past. This was years ago. Those memories still freak me out these days when I think back. So, we moved to a small mountain town in southwest Colorado. Our house used to be the crack house or the drug house a couple years before the people who lived here before us. One day, about 3 years ago, a very skinny man came into our backyard looking around, as some of our neighbors said. Everyone was either at school or at work, so none of us really saw it, besides me. I saw the guy when he came back. We live right on an alleyway, and when he heard me come into the house, he left and walked into the alleyway. I think he came around expecting the old drug dealer tenants to be here, but when he was discovered, he got the hell out of there. Apparently one of our neighbors called the cops, but nothing significant came out of that. I'm glad I never had to approach him. I self-renovated my side of an old, cheap, and very scary duplex in college before moving in. It was one house that had been split into two, and the other side was still painted completely black inside when this group of guys moved in. So many things happened when they lived there, but two stand out 20+ years later. My electric bill suddenly quadrupled. Turns out they had figured out how to power their side by plugging into mine through the shared attic. Soon after they moved, I noticed a small hole in the ceiling above my bed. Turns out they had one in my shower too. People usually talk about crazy cat ladies, but I had a crazy cat man living next to me at one point. This man had a ton of cats. At night, we'd have at least 20 polydactyl cats laying on our porch. We'd always find dead kittens or cats in our driveway, under or by our porch, and in our backyard. He had 2 basement windows that were knocked out, and he oiled car hoods over those windows, which left enough room for the cats to go in and out freely in his house. He also burned all of his trash in his backyard. One day we had the police and firemen banging on our door because someone had called and said our car was on fire. It wasn't. He was just burning trash in a barrel so close to our car. It looked like it was on fire. He got a lot of police complaints, but that guy did not give a f. I had been sitting in my backyard when a cop came by his house complaining about the smoke from his trash burning. "You got a warrant, mother FR? This is my G-damn property. If I want to burn shit, I'm going to burn shit. Now get the F off my property until you have a warrant." We lived next to him for about a year. Thankfully, the worst thing our new neighbor does is mow her lawn 3 times a week and makes us look bad. Two neighbors at 2 different neighborhoods. The first were abusive parents, and we accidentally picked up their baby monitor on my family's baby monitor across the street. It was horrible what was happening. Second neighbor was only a temporary neighbor. Some type of witch or something. Paranormal stuff started happening straight up poltergeist angry spirit time. Was pretty crazy. Wheelchair lady. She lived across the street from us, and I think just sat and stared out her window until she saw me go in the front yard. She was elderly, would never leave, and made the wise choice to smoke with her oxygen on. She would come out and just stare and watch me do yard work. She would open the gate and just come into the backyard because the neighbors who lived there before let her. I hated going outside. Eventually, we established some boundaries. Her son was also a registered sex offender and pretty damn sketchy, but he was always kind and helpful towards us. It was a weird area. Not really creepy, but I never figured this one out. For context, this block of flats was pretty crappy and run down and wasn't in the best area, but it wasn't the worst. I stayed there for 2 years. I noticed pretty quickly after moving in that my neighbor was a bit sketchy. He always got picked up and dropped off in an expensive blacked-out Mercedes weird because this wasn't a nice area. And I once opened my closed door right as a stranger was handing him a roll of 20s about 2 inches thick. He snatched it and gave me a really dirty look. Whatever, I just assumed he was dealing, but if he stayed out my way, I didn't care. I put a Ring camera outside my door and started to notice a lot of extra weird activity. His flat was directly across from mine, and I quickly got flooded with notifications several times an hour, all through the night. It seemed like there was that one guy that lived there permanently, plus there was always between 4 additional men in their 30s or 40s staying there with him at a time. but only for maybe 6 weeks before they would disappear, and then new guys would take their place. They all seemed to have keys and never arrived or left at the same time as each other, and wouldn't leave the flat for long. If I passed any of them in the close, they never seemed to speak any English or understand me at all and tried very hard not to make eye contact with me. Also, when a new guy would move in, I would never see them move in any boxes or belongings. He would just show up on their own with a key and then disappear weeks later. Only other things I noticed about them was that I never had any noise coming from their flat. No talking, TV, music, nothing. That always creeped me out because the walls were horribly thin, and I could always hear every other neighbor talking or watching TV so clearly that you could pick up what show they were watching. But this flat was always completely silent. All the men that moved in or left fit a very similar profile, age, sex, race, and had the same mysterious routine. My best guess was that it had something to do with illegal immigration, because in the 2 years I was there, I'd guess over 60 guys total came or went. But I never did find out. One day they all disappeared, including the permanent guy, but I never saw any furniture or boxes being moved out. About a month after the police came to my door looking for one guy in particular, I didn't know him by name, but they showed me a photo and I recognized him as one of the many temp guys. They wouldn't say why they were looking for him. Me and my roommate used to live next to a dude that had 2 sons, one of which we called Creeper. Dude was probably like 10, and every time we went out front to smoke, he would come out and talk to us. I kind of felt bad for him because he clearly had no friends. His dad was always at work and his brother played Xbox all day. At the same time, he was really rude. The thing is, he was always asking to come in, and we had to explain how weird it would look for 2 fully grown men to invite a young boy in their house. It got to the point where he would knock on our window when we were inside and asking us to come out, and he would start talking to us through a window. A closed window with our blinds down. Lived in an apartment complex. Our front door faced the patio balconies of the apartments across the driveway. One of the patio sliding doors always had a silhouette of a person standing in at the door, looking out. It was always in the same place, in the same position, at all hours of the day. So after several months living there, I decided it was a cardboard cutout in the window. The large patio sliding door was adorned with outdoor party lights that were always on. About a year after living there, I'd gotten used to the cardboard cutout silhouette always being there and didn't think much about it. One early morning, maybe 5 a.m., as it was still dark outside, I went to take the trash out. Imagine my shock when the party lights started flashing off and on. I looked up to see what was going on, and the cardboard cutout was moving. I could see its arm moving as it was flicking the switch up and down. I realized that the silhouette was in fact not a cardboard cutout, but rather a person who was always in the window, always watching everything going on outside. To this day, I don't know why the person was flashing the lights, perhaps to gain my attention. But it was definitely creepy to think that for the last year, this mysterious silhouette was just a neighbor quietly watching everything. One of my neighbors faked seizures in order to guilt me into looking after him. He then started trying to touch me inappropriately during them. When I turned him down and refused to look after him anymore, he did not take it very well. He painted a picture of him hanging me, set it alight, and left it on my doorstep. When police were called, he said that I had broken into his flat, killed his pet rat, stole his painting, and set it alight myself. His pet rat was a wild rat he'd lured into his own flat and brained with a hammer. He'd then spent half of his time out in our shared garden digging holes, at which point I put up a security camera so the landlord knew it wasn't me. Then one day, Some builders next door woke him up at 4 p.m. and he snapped. Started screaming at them. Then, when they refused to stop, slashed all 4 tires of their van, stabbed one of them in the leg with their own screwdriver, and stabbed another neighbor's dog, before setting his whole flat on fire and fleeing. I never saw him again, but someone decided to give my name and address to every homeless person in the city, saying I was a prostitute who would do anal for Mamba. Suffice to say, I moved shortly after that. Edit. Builder and dog made full recoveries. For a long time, the neighbor behind my family's house was very odd while I was growing up. He was an older guy with gray hair and a perpetual 1,000-yard stare. Sometimes he'd be in his garage and meticulously touching all of his tools, petting the hatchet, fondling screwdrivers and hammers. For a long time I was sure he was secretly a serial killer. My dad asked him for some tools once, didn't get a reply back, but got a whole toolbox a few moments later as the guy never said a word, just staring off into the pines and smiling the whole time. He also had weird habits of mowing his lawn in the middle of the night or doing his gardening in pitch black at 3 a.m. He usually kept to himself and never left his property. A few years after I had moved out, I met my neighbor's son and he explained it all. My neighbor was a war veteran, almost completely blind, and chemical warfare had burned his throat, so he couldn't speak. He knew the limits of his property, so he never left, and would use his hands as his eyes to find various tools and do household maintenance. It made it a bit less creepy and much more depressing. The poor guy is essentially locked in his own body, trapped on his property with barely enough of his senses left to function. He apparently considers my dad his best friend, since he's the only person to actually attempt to interact with him outside of his close family. My dad's next-door neighbor. Such a list of creepy or weird. He put bear traps in his haystack to catch the neighborhood kids who had been playing in it. He filled another neighbor's driveway with a truckload of gravel as revenge for them fencing their own property. Neighborhood legend says he was responsible for all the nails scattered in the road that were always turning up in people's tires. But the worst was when I was in middle school and my dad went away on business for a couple weeks, leaving me to watch the farm by myself. The neighbor couldn't help but notice the empty driveway, so he took up terrorizing me as a hobby for a bit. It started with nightly window tapping, then doorknob rattling, and then escalated into sabotage. Every morning I'd nervously step outside to go tend the animals, and find some new disaster that couldn't be easily explained away. The very worst was the morning I stepped outside and found all the chickens lined up along the side of a shed, evenly spaced, with their necks broken. A few were still moving a bit. Eventually my dad came home and blamed me and/or my dog for all the disasters. Claimed I was just terribly careless, had left the chicken yard unlatched, that my dog had gotten in and killed the chickens, all sorts of nonsense. I was only about 14 years old at the time, but I was old enough to know dogs don't pose their dinner in neat rows facing the back door. This guy at my apartment complex. I call him F that guy. Whenever I walk my dogs and he's out walking, he will full-on stop and face me and stare. He could be 200 yards away. If he sees me, stops, faces me, and won't stop until I'm out of sight. I've complained to the front office, but I know it's fruitless. He isn't hurting anyone, and he has the right to be outside like the rest of us. So I stopped complaining and started F with him. When he stops and stares, I take a selfie with him in the background. That way, if he is a creep and murders me in my sleep, at least the cops will have a history of his creepiness. I had an upstairs neighbor who was a 65, 70-year-old chain-smoking alcoholic. Her name was Betty, the most crabby, hateful, and cantankerous old cunt you've ever had the displeasure of meeting. Emphysema, on oxygen, smoked 3 packs a day. Middle of my boy's b-day party, she shows up at the door in her robe, invites herself in and proceeds to drink my stepmother's beer, whilst her old saggy shriveled tits hanging out of her robe. She'd drink hot Canadian mist whiskey out of a 44 Oz tumbler with a G-damn straw. One evening, she'd asked if I'd pick her up some groceries. When I went to the store, I did my shopping and came home to a huge mess of trash, ashes, liquor, and blood at the bottom of the stairs. So I hoofed up to see what the hell happened. And when she opened the door, she was skint up like a walking beef jerky. Both elbows, nose, chin, forehead, and both knees. So, kinda shocked, I asked her, "Got him, Betty, are you all right?" Without a bit of hesitation, she says, Satori, I'm a tough old bitch." Twice in 6 months, she got in a straight-up fist fight with her daughter in the parking lot of the apartment complex. Somehow neither went to jail. Yeah, crazy Betty was something else. The year I turned 10 years old, my mom, who had custody of me after my parents divorced, and I moved into a spacious 2-bedroom apartment in what is statistically considered one of the safest cities in America. We moved out just a few years ago, after my grandmother passed away, but I spent 12 years living in this place. The apartment was one of 5 in our building. You know how a duplex has 2 units in the same building, split down the middle? This building was quartered into 4 units with an added unit on the lower level. We had the unit above the lower level unit. Our landlord at the time was kind of a dipshit. If something broke and needed fixing or replacing, he would come and attempt to fix it himself, instead of just hiring an expert, and all the while he'd make comments about how women break things. What can I say? Anyway, at the time of my story, I'm 13 years old. Our dumb landlord rents out the lower level unit to a lovely young couple. For anonymity, I'll call them George and Lisa. On the night they moved in, I remember they had music just blasting from their new home as they moved furniture and boxes down the stairs with their friends. It was uncharacteristically loud for the neighborhood, but none of us other residents actually had a problem with it. They seemed pleasant enough. The pleasantness lasted about a week before George and Lisa started having these blowout screaming matches. My mom and I would hear her start screaming and cussing at him. He'd try to get her to back off and calm down, and then they'd move on to the next stage, which was slamming and throwing random shit at each other. Always after an hour or so of this, things would go quiet, and then Lisa would be heard in the back of the house, where the bedrooms were, just sobbing. There was one day where I heard Lisa walking around outside, having a conversation with herself in different voices. A few more weeks, and we began to notice that George and Lisa got a lot of strange visitors at strange times, who always seemed intoxicated and sometimes banged on our huge living room window without knowing whose window it was. When it was very quiet, I heard scraping sounds coming from the kitchen area, a lot. One time I heard George and Lisa having the most obnoxious sex I have ever heard. Oi. The night things went too far for us was when a woman showed up at 3 a.m. with an empty milk jug and started ringing every doorbell to our building and scratching at the front door, trying to get in and moaning or yelling for George and Lisa. She disappeared after a few minutes, and suddenly we hear the back door to the building jiggling, and you could tell there was now more than one person trying to break in. My mom called the police, and we gathered our things and went to a restaurant for breakfast, exhausted after no sleep, and then went and booked a hotel for the night. We just couldn't deal with them again. After we complained to the landlord and the police multiple times, things got quiet and really awkward between us and the neighbors. And that's when the FBI showed up. I shit you not. I go to answer the door and a man and a woman ask if they can talk to my adult. I say sure and lead them to our unit, which we always kept open during the day anyway. And right there, they open a binder and show us photos of George and Lisa. They ask if we happen to have seen them before, and we're like, they live downstairs. It turns out they're both living under false identities, major fraudsters, and dealing cocaine. Shortly after this, George and Lisa moved into the apartment building across the street and were arrested within a month. So that's it. That's kind of my boring story about living above felons. This happened a few years ago, and it still creeps me out thinking about it. I moved out of my mom's house and got my own apartment after moving states for the first time. It looked like a predominantly safe neighborhood. I'm into true crime, so I'm always overly cautious. Anyway, about a few weeks after I moved in, my apartment on the bottom floor flooded because the washer in the upstairs apartment was turned on and no one was there to shut it off. I barely unpacked, so I didn't really have anything to catch this water flooding in from my ceiling. It was after business hours, and the emergency number was just a reroute to the apartment main line that was closed after hours. I was running around knocking on doors, hoping someone would answer so I could grab a bowl or something to hold this water until I could get a hold of someone in the emergency maintenance. The guy directly across from me finally answered, and I frantically explained my situation and asked for a bowl or something. He started to say he didn't have anything until he could literally hear and see all the water. He ran back to his place and pulled out this massive plastic storage bin. We rotate on switching out bins of water until Rainbow showed up to save the day. My living room and kitchen were soaked, but my place was still livable. I told the guy thank you, then was going back until he stopped me and invited me to stay at his place for the night. I told him it wasn't necessary, my place was okay, and he insisted. He claimed he was getting ready to go to work, but he went back in his apartment, grabbed his key, cleaned off his couch and his bed, and said I could stay for the night, and he'll come in the back door around 3 a.m. He wasn't giving up, so I took the key until he left, and then I returned his bin and the key and went back to my apartment and avoided this dude like the plague. Red flag 1. A couple weeks later, I would take my dog out to go potty. I could hear this neighbor door open and close, so I would try to time it safely to avoid him. Unfortunately, it seemed like he was doing the same to me. I opened my door, and he happens to be leaving at the same time to try and talk. He stops me and starts asking about my family, if I'm from here, if I have family close. Red flag 2. After about 6 months of this bobbing and weaving this weirdo, I take my dog out before bed to go potty. I would purposely walk around the back in order to avoid walking in front of this guy's apartment window, who now had his blinds open all the time so he couldn't see me. I get out, walk to the back, and just have this eerie feeling of someone watching me. I look behind me, and I see this guy peering around the corner just staring at me. He noticed me notice him, and he goes back and I hear the door close. I start second guessing if I locked my door. I locked it every time I left. Even if I walked 2 feet, I go back, check my door, then head back out the same way. I take my dog out for about 10 minutes. Walk home, and I can hear his door and keys as I'm about to approach my door. I hide around the side waiting him out. I hear his door close, but he doesn't leave. He's just standing there juggling his keys. It's cold out and my pup is freezing. I decide to take my chances and go to my door. As soon as I walk out, he's standing there and says, "Oh, sorry about earlier. I thought I saw someone walk by. Keep in mind, I walked in the back to purposely avoid him noticing me." I quickly said okay and went inside my place. It clicked. There is no way he could have known when I took my dog out and came back home, unless he was peeping through the peephole and saw me. The last straw and red flag flashing in spotlights. I finally emailed my management, sending them the complaint, and explained everything I just did. Within the next few weeks, that dude moved out without a blink of an eye. I've had many creepy encounters like this, so stay tuned. Just be aware and listen to your gut. This past weekend, my boyfriend 30 male and I 23 female went to his brother and sister-in-law's house for a birthday dinner. Their names are John and Maria, and they have two older sons, Mark 26 and Bill 23. Just to set the story, their house is in a gated community in a pretty affluent area of town. The dinner was attended by some family friends, as well as my boyfriend's 18-year-old niece, Carla, and 19-year-old nephew, Joe. The dinner started winding down around 11:30 p.m., and my boyfriend and I were getting ready to leave. I had picked up some things for Carla earlier in the day, so she was walking outside with me to get them from my car. We were followed outside by my boyfriend, Joe, and Bill as they chatted about sports. They stopped in the driveway, still talking, while Carla and I started walking towards my car, which was parked 1-2 houses down the street at the corner. As we're walking to my car, I notice a figure standing in the driveway of a house directly behind my car. The figure was maybe 50 feet away from my car, standing slightly hunched over and facing my car. I stared at him, clearly a man, for 2 or 3 seconds and whispered to Carla to look at him. We started walking at a much slower pace and continued staring at the man standing in the driveway. He had a jacket with the hood on, and the way he was standing didn't allow us to see his face. He was facing away from the light over the garage directly behind him. By nature and upbringing, I'm very paranoid. I'm a petite female, as is Carla, and this man set off every alarm in my body. I felt a surge of adrenaline, and I tried to assess the situation and see what I could do if he tried anything. If he did try anything, how much damage could he inflict until the guys noticed and helped us? Was he waiting for the last group to leave the house? Trying to rob someone? Scoping out houses, and we caught him in the act. We continued walking, and I didn't take my eyes off him for a second. I tried to memorize every detail about his appearance, just in case. We continued to my car, got the things, and turned around to walk back to the driveway, where my boyfriend, Bill, and Joe were still talking, oblivious. I nearly walked backward to keep my eye on this man in the driveway. The entire time we were walking to and from my car, this man didn't move a single muscle. He didn't even sway, as if shifting his weight from foot to foot. It was a very cold night for our area, at least, probably between 35-40 Fahrenheit and windy. It's late at night, and this guy is standing in a driveway in the cold and not moving a muscle. He wasn't smoking, as his hands were in his pockets. I'm not sure if he was the homeowner, as I don't live in that neighborhood, so he could even just be a random person. We practically ran back to the driveway where the guys were while trying to keep an eye on this guy at the same time. I quickly told my boyfriend about some guy standing in that driveway. All the guys looked and saw him still standing in the exact same place, in the exact same position. Bill told my boyfriend and me to go ahead and walk to our car, while he made sure the guy didn't pull anything. We walked slowly to the car, keeping an eye on him. I hopped in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and looked into the rearview mirror and still saw the man standing there. I drove forward, turned around to exit the street, and stopped at the stop sign in front of the driveway the man was standing in. My headlights shone over him, but I was still unable to see his face. Once again, he still hadn't moved a muscle in the 5 minutes all of this took place. He was so still I almost thought he might have been a mannequin, and someone was pulling a prank. We drove out of the gate and headed towards the highway. I had my boyfriend text Maria to let her know about this guy standing outside. She texted back a few minutes later and said that John went outside, and the man was still standing there. As we were on the highway and nearly home, roughly 10-15 minutes after leaving John and Maria's house, she called me and said the man was still outside and hadn't moved. We haven't been to their house since this weekend. I have no idea what the man was doing or where he went. Maria hasn't mentioned anything happening in their neighborhood, so maybe a creepy homeowner. But for real, who stands outside their house in the middle of the night? So last night, around 11 p.m., I was downstairs sitting at a table that faces the window in front of the backyard. My backyard is fenced, and right outside the fence is a golf course where deer usually stay. I've seen a coyote once, but in my front yard, although people have seen them in the golf course before. Keep in mind, I'm in Texas. Anyways, at this time, I heard something crying from the left of the window. At first, I thought it was my sister watching a TikTok video where the little boy that lives with us crying, but it wasn't. Everyone was in their rooms, and I was the only one downstairs to hear this. This cry sounded like a baby wailing wah, wah about twice, and then the sound diminished quickly. I could have sworn I heard footsteps outside or someone else there possibly making the baby or animal stop. Like maybe very soft coaxing that was hard to make out. I may have just been extremely paranoid at that point because I couldn't move out of my seat since that sound was so disturbing. The supposed baby sounded like they were in pain. My eyes were tearing up like, why? I don't believe in any ghosts or paranormal activity, but it was hella creepy. It's crazy because to the left of my backyard is the house of the friendly old neighbors I know, and they do not have kids. They have dogs who only bark loudly occasionally during the daytime. I do think I saw the car of someone visiting parked in their driveway yesterday, but I don't know about any babies. The sound was just too close to the window for it to be a neighbor whose backyard is like 50 feet away. Someone mentioned to me it could be someone playing an audio of a baby crying to lure me outside and kidnap me. Our neighborhood really doesn't have that stuff happening, and I don't know if anyone would climb our tall fences. Our fences also make loud noises when closed. Maybe the person entered or climbed from the short fence with a gate to the golf course, but who would be there at night? Some of our lights are activated by motion sensor, too. I looked up videos of animal noises because another person suggested it was a Fisher cat, but I'm obviously in the South in Texas. Also, the Fisher cat sounds like a high-pitched adult crying and not a baby. I listened to foxes, raccoons, deer, mountain lions, and bullfrogs, but nothing LOL. If someone could please give me ideas, that'd be great. I wish I could have recorded it, but it was so quick, and my memory is low-key starting to fade. I used to live in a brick house that had lots of neighbors. My backyard had a fence that kept our dog in. Every other day I'd catch my neighbor peeking over the fence around nighttime. It looked like he was trying to get a view into our windows from our big glass sliding back door. Every time he noticed that I saw him, he'd bend down where I couldn't see his face peeking over the fence. This happened for months, but one day I let my dog out at midnight and I closed the door. About 5 minutes later, my dog started barking like he saw someone, so I went outside to check and saw my dog barking towards the tree that was in my backyard. I thought he was just barking at an animal until I saw my neighbor's face peek around the tree and quickly hide again. I called my dog to come back inside and called the cops. The cops got there in around 10 minutes and arrested my neighbor. At the age of 21, I moved in with my cousin in a house nestled deep in the woods. Our home was in a place called Van Leer, situated between Dixon and Erin, Tennessee, surrounded by dense forests. Living there meant being a good 45 minutes away from the nearest city. It's like the smallest town you've ever seen. Picture this, you can zip through the whole place in just 2 minutes and wave hi to all 12 local shops. Beyond that, it's mostly farms breaking up the big patches of woods in between. Oh, and there's this random gas station stuck right in the middle of a fork in the road, pointing towards where I live. Sometimes you'll catch a glimpse of cows or horses grazing in the fields. It's a quiet place, with only a few people buzzing around, and everyone knows everyone else. I moved in with my cousin in November of 2011, a week before my birthday. Sometimes we had parties, but most days we just did our own thing. When we weren't working, we played video games and watched movies together. The house was made by the people who lived there before us, and they let us stay for only $250 a month. That was just enough to cover the taxes on the house each year. The house had 3 bedrooms. The main bedroom was downstairs next to the living room. There was also the back room, which used to be an open porch before they put up full walls. Upstairs was the loft where I slept. All the bedrooms and bathrooms were on one side of the house, and on the other side, there was the kitchen and living area. We hung out a lot in the living room with our TVS and game systems. They were all on a 12ft wall between the doors so there wouldn't be any glare from the windows. We also had our meals in the living area. This brings me to one of my tasks. I had to take out the kitchen scraps and dump them at the edge of the woods, about half a football field away from the front porch. I did this almost every day for many months after moving in because it meant I didn't have to wash the dishes. When I went out to dump the scraps, I got used to seeing raccoons, possums, deer, rabbits, and sometimes even foxes or coyotes. At first, the coyotes made me a bit nervous because all I could see were their eyes, or I'd hear sniffing and panting while walking to the dumping spot. Nothing ever really bothered me. They all knew that once I dropped the food and walked away, it was free for them to grab. But in September 2012, I started having a new visitor who showed up regularly, and this one was way bigger than any coyote or dog I knew. I went out like always to toss out the scraps from dinner that night, but it was strangely quiet. No coyotes howling, no raccoons or possums making their usual sounds. As I walked, I felt the hairs on my arms stand up, but I figured it was just because it was getting colder, and maybe that's why there were fewer animals around. But when I got to the dumping spot and poured out the scraps, something really big growled at me, and I could feel it deep in my bones. So, I quickly finished scraping out the pot and slowly stepped back from the line of trees. I noticed a pair of yellowish eyes reflecting a little to the left of where I dumped the scraps. I kept staring at it as I moved backward, never taking my eyes off the creature. When I got inside, I told my cousin that there was a big animal out there tonight. I suggested we keep the porch light on to watch it in case it comes too close to the house. The rest of the night was quiet, but after that, whenever I took out the scraps, that creature would be there waiting for me to drop the food and step back. Its growl always gave me the chills. I never saw more than its eyes, and after about a month, it stopped growling when I came out, even though I could still see it watching me from the woods. Fast forward to December. The ground was all covered in snow, and it got really cold. I kept giving food to that creature thing, even when Christmas came around. Then, my cousin and I went to stay with family for the holidays, and we were away for about a week. When we came back, we had lots of extra food. After bringing everything inside and getting comfortable, my cousin fell asleep on the couch in the living room, and I went to bed in my room upstairs. That night, I woke up feeling thirsty and went downstairs to get some water. As I was going down the stairs, I heard a little thumping noise from downstairs. Peeking over the railing and seeing my cousin still asleep on the couch, I thought maybe something was on the porch. Sometimes raccoons or turkeys would show up. But when I looked through the big glass doors, I didn't see anything. It was really cold, like 7 Celsius, so I didn't open the doors. I went into the kitchen while still keeping an eye on the doors in the living room. That's when I saw something, a head like a big dog poking around the side of the door. The head was really big, and it started sniffing against the glass door. I got a little scared when I saw it, but then I thought it was just a really big dog. Maybe the one I've been giving food to for the past few months, so I started to feel more relaxed. Remembering I was away for a week, I thought that the thing might be hungry, so I took some turkey from the fridge, planning to throw it out the kitchen door onto the porch for it to eat. But when I turned back from the fridge and looked at the door, I froze at first when I saw its head. It was about 3 feet off the ground, but now I was looking up at the creature's face. It was standing on 2 legs, way taller than me. It had to bend down to look through the door. I'm 6 feet tall, and my cousin is 6'5". His head just about touches the top of his door frame. so this creature was easily 7 feet tall. I was shocked and couldn't move, really scared. What scared me even more was that the thing reached for the door handle to the sliding glass door and started pulling on it. My heart was beating fast, and I heard the frame hitting against the door lock. But thankfully, we hadn't unlocked them since we got home. Right then, my cousin started waking up. He rolled off the couch, still half asleep, and walked towards the bathroom. That's when he saw me standing frozen in front of the glass door near the kitchen. He was about to say something when he noticed the dark figure at our door. The creature looked at him and growled. My eyes went back and forth between the two before I stepped closer to the kitchen door. My cousin, stuck in one spot, was really scared by what he saw. I grabbed the kitchen door handle and unlocked it. My cousin, barely making a sound, asked me in a whisper what on earth I was doing. I yanked the door open and quickly tossed the plate of turkey outside, then slammed the door and locked it. The creature saw the food flying towards the yard, gave me one more look, and leaped off the porch to get the food. My cousin grabbed me and took me upstairs to the loft bedroom, which had a strong door. We stayed in that room all night, listening for any sounds. After a few minutes, we could hear it trying the door again, sniffing its nose against the window. It tapped on the window for a few minutes when it found out the door wouldn't open. Eventually, it went away and vanished into the woods. The next morning, I took the scraps out, but I was too scared to go all the way to the woods. Even though this werewolf thing didn't really act mean to us, I was too scared to go outside at night after that. Sometimes we'd see something in the yard at night, usually close to where I threw the scraps. Each time we spotted it, we'd turn off the TVS and lights and watch until it went back into the woods. Even though we don't know exactly what it is, having something like this around as a neighbor is both fascinating and scary. So this happened to me over the past weekend. A little backstory is required here for understanding. My girlfriend has lived in this old house, which is divided into a downstairs and upstairs apartment, with hers being downstairs. This past summer, the college kid who lived above her graduated and moved back to the state next to us, and I moved in. We usually will hang downstairs since she has a large, comfortable sectional couch, and I have a not-so-comfortable love seat and less comfortable chair in our respective living rooms, which we were doing this past Sunday. As we are hanging out watching movies on Prime, I headed up to my apartment just for a second to grab a beer and some Irish cream. As I am turning on the light, I noticed a couple of green beams like laser pointers on one of the curtains on one of my living room windows. There is a small house next to ours where 2 teens live with their parents, so I figured it was the kids messing around. Curious, I open up the curtain and look down. Nobody in their backyard, so I observe the immediate neighborhood. I see in the rear window of an upper floor room in a house around the corner from us with a guy standing in it. He has some object with 3 small green lights on it and also appears to be scanning the neighborhood. The room he is in is dark, but I can see his shadowy figure. Even stranger, yet I am fairly sure that room is a bathroom because I have seen shirtless males going in and out with towels over their shoulders. The house is like maybe 100 to 150 feet from ours, so I can see it well. The 2 guys who live there are newer residents as they just moved into the house, not long after I moved into my apartment. Why is this guy standing in his bathroom, and what is he doing? As I stand there trying to figure it out, he looks directly at me, staring at him out my window. All of a sudden, the green lights beam around quickly, and he darts out of that room. Not the super creepiest thing in the world, but definitely strange for sure. Especially since he saw me watching him, then bolted. Any ideas of what the thing with green lights was? This takes place about 5 years ago when I was 18. I am a girl, if this helps make sense a little bit. I had moved to Missouri to stay with my grandparents while they helped me lose weight, go to college, and find a job. Where we lived had a bunch of hills, really steep hills, so part of my exercise would be to walk the mile to my college and back up and down hill to gain leg strength. One day, as I'm making my way up the first hill a couple houses down, one of my older neighbors was standing outside with his dog. He waved at me, didn't think much of it as I had earbuds in, so I waved back. He took my wave as an invitation to talk. He introduces himself as Neil. Being socially awkward as hell, I didn't stop him and just made small talk for a bit. He asked me my name, how old I was, what I was doing, how I'm doing, etc. All while I'm petting his dog. Now, I didn't mind answering. He was clearly in his 50s or 60s, probably just wondering about the new face in the neighborhood. After a few minutes, I got uncomfortable enough to make an excuse of getting out of there to continue on my walk. He happily said he would walk with me to continue the conversation. I died a little inside, but just said sure, figuring the hills would wear him out and head turn around. He eventually did and walked back home with his dog, leaving me alone. I did maybe half the walk and speed walked back home to avoid another interaction. A week or so later, I hear a knock on our side door. I open it up, and there's the neighbor. I freaked out a second before he asked where my dad was. I told him my grandpa was home, and again, he asked to see him. So I yelled for Grandpa. He came up the stairs, saw the guy, and went outside and shut the door. I could hear heated words between the both of them for a minute or so before Grandpa came back inside. Our road had a long gate that was mostly locked because of people speeding through, making it unsafe for little ones to come out and play. Not to mention the near 90 turn that happened shortly down the road, so people don't plow right into one of my neighbor's house. Apparently, because our closest neighbor would unlock it for a shortcut when I would get a ride to college, old neighbor took this as us disrespecting him, even though it wasn't his gate. He didn't like the fact that Grandpa would drive through with his Jeep, which is why Grandpa pretty much told him to F off with his shit. I relayed this story to my grandma later on that night, considering WTF how crazy is this guy, telling her about how he's overly friendly with me and will talk to me every time he sees me. She acts a little shocked and asked me, which neighbor? The one 2 houses down, right after the gate. I said, oh, that's the guy that killed his wife. My grandma says nonchalantly. My heart skipped a beat, and I asked her what she meant. She then goes to tell me his name. It's not Neil, about how he had a history of abuse with his wives or girlfriends, burning them with cigarettes, beating them, and ends with the last one he had murdered his last wife by taking her out to the garage, duct taping her to a chair with over 100 feet of duct tape and setting her on fire. I'm speechless at this point and just ask her how she knows this. There is a book about him, about his crimes, how he had murdered his wife and went to trial for it in the 80s or so. He ended up spending 4 years in prison. My neighbor who owned the gate owns a copy of said book. It was a huge thing back then. Even when I told my other grandpa his name, he knew who I was talking about. I actively avoided him after that, fearing he was grooming me or something. About a month or so after finding all this information out, I'm walking home and I see county sheriff's cars outside his house. I'm walking by just looking out of curiosity, and his dog sees me and runs over, wanting pets, which I happily give. I hear someone yell out the dog's name, and it was the woman he was living with, I guess his girlfriend. She came and scooped up the dog, apologizing, and I just cowls and stopped looking at her face. She was beaten, her eyes swollen, bruised around the sockets, bloody cheeks and tear-stained face. I asked her if she was okay out of instinct, and she just told me she was fine before walking back over to the cops. Found out he beat the shit out of her AMD. The cops were just waiting to get him on something, so they brought as much as they could to his house to get him. Turns out he jumped on the semi-truck of the guy that lived across the street, and last I had heard, the semi made its way to Colorado. So, that's the story of how I ran into a killer. This is a bit more scary than creepy for me, but my next-door neighbor had a very, very bad marriage to a very psychotic woman. They had arguments every single day for months till they divorced and moved out rental property. He moved one block up the road and started causing problems for the people over there, which came to a head when he started walking up and down the street with a handgun. Cops were called, and by the time they got there, he had barricaded himself in his home, threatening to shoot someone with him. Later found out no one else was in the house with him. He was in there for about 3 hours before he gave up. We were in a neighborhood with a lot of kids. There was this one guy who was 15 years older than the majority of us. Sometimes he'd play with us when we were outside, but we'd never invite him inside, and he never asked. He'd just play games with us. It was almost wholesome. I remember we were playing catch and we wanted to take a break and get water. He asked if he could come in to have water too, because he didn't want to walk all the way home just for water, and then come back. We didn't think anything of it and said, of course, friend. When he was inside, he said he had to use the bathroom. 15 minutes later, we went looking for him and found him in my room, in my walk-in closet. He looked up and said, "Oh, sorry, I got distracted, ready to play more." As a kid, I was just like, weirdo. But as an adult, I wish I asked him to leave and told my parents. I literally had to wear pull-ups at night, still bladder problems, and this guy was rummaging through my room as if he was my big brother. Not so much creepy as real sad. She was a lady of around 50 or so, and she'd previously been homeless. She lived in the house next to mine, which was government housing. She didn't like her house and would spend her days begging in the city. At night, when she was home, she would smash things in her house and yell sporadically. Her accent would change based on her mood. On the day this story takes place, she spoke with a French accent. One day I came home from work and she was pacing back and forth on the footpath outside our houses, and I stopped to ask what was wrong. She told me she'd locked herself out of her house and insisted I help her break in. Asked if I had a crowbar or a hammer or something. I didn't, but I did have a phone, so I offered to call a locksmith. She shouted that she didn't need a locksmith, she needed the police. I didn't understand how the police were going to help in this situation, but she was very insistent. I gave her my phone and she called the police. After a heated exchange, she threw my phone to the ground in frustration, yelled something along the lines of "F, pigs," and began to pace again. She started telling me stories about her life. She'd been orphaned at a young age and had lived in institutions for most of her life. When she spoke about the places she'd lived, her French accent disappeared entirely, and she spoke with a very pronounced Australian accent. She told me about her health. It wasn't the best, and she had 7 hernias. She offered to show me. I declined. She showed me anyway. She asked me for a crowbar again. I told her I didn't have any tools, and she screamed. She told me that I should be the one to call the police. They'd listen to me. I called the non-emergency line, and the woman who took my call audibly sighed when I gave the address and name. This was not the first time this neighbor had been locked out of her house, apparently. Within 5 minutes, 2 squad cars and an ambulance arrived. My neighbor explained in her French accent that all she needed was a crowbar. Her request was refused, and the police took her away. Months later, I was at a party and made references to my neighbor, and the dude I was talking to said, "Is that neighbor with the 7 hernias?" Apparently, my neighbor was a regular at the bottle this dude's wife worked at. She'd approach the window of the bottle shop, raise her shirt, and press her stomach up against the glass. This served as a distraction while her friend put bottles of port down his pants. I've since moved out of that house, but I still see her from time to time in the city, always in the same spot. two different, still active neighbors. First one was a woman knocking on my door. No car. It was odd, and I didn't know she was my neighbor 2 doors down. Anyway, she proceeds to tell she's a neighbor, which clears up the car thing, then asks me why her phone GPS shows that she's at my house. I'm an IT guy by trade, so I have a lot of scenarios. Her husband evidently looks at her Google Maps locations, and it shows she is at my house, and that hackers must be in her phone. I blow it off, and she leaves. Eventually, I meet the husband, and he's straight up tinfoil hat. Government is out to get him. The other neighbor who happens to live next to tinfoil hat man bought a vacant 3-acre lot estate sale next to me and adjoining his other property next to it. I tried to get an acre of it when it was selling, but didn't happen much to my chagrin. I got 20 feet. The 20 feet is relevant because the trees that line my driveway are actually on the property of the vacant lot. Anyway, before he even signs the paperwork to buy it, he comes over asking if I plan to take care of them. If not, he's going to cut them down. They are decorative trees and would look pretty lopsided if they lined one side of the driveway. Well, now I own both sides, so the trees are my problem, but he got me in the end. His property line extends 12 feet past mine, and he loves to drive his truck through the empty lot through this 12 feet, which just so happens to be my driveway and culvert. His repeated driving had damaged my driveway and causing it to sink. Because the driveway is in a right-of-way, it's on me to fix it, and I can't stop him from driving over it. This douche nozzle, though, feels the need to walk to the property line and stare at what's happening on my property. He cleared all of the trees and brush that gave us privacy from the 2 neighbors behind us. I forgot to mention the swing he has in this empty lot that faces our house. He creeps my kids out, so now we are looking to put up a privacy fence. Two years ago, a daughter of our neighbor moved to a destroyed barn, which is right next to our house, that has no electricity, internet, etc. We've been told by her mother that she is a nice person, and that she recently got released from asylum, maybe something a bit different. But I can't remember 100% what it was because of some mental illness she had. About 2 weeks in, she started buying spray paints in order to spray walls and roof. When we asked her why, she said so that she can see better at night since she still had no electricity. Eventually, she went through about 20 spray cans that she didn't throw away but kept them. One particular evening, she set them all on fire, making them explode, and the explosion caused a little fire by her and our house. The fire lasted for about half an hour, covered around 50 meters, and she did nothing to put it out. In about 20 minutes after the fire was put out, police knocked on our door asking what happened. Later we learned that she called cops on us because she thought that we don't like her and that we wanted to kill her. Before this incident, we've had a nice relationship with her. Since she has no electricity, she came every day to our house so that she can charge her tablet, have some drinks, etc. When cops came to visit, the spray paints explosions were so loud that our mayor noticed, gave us a visit, and right as he came, she called cops second time because she thought that the mayor came to help us get rid of her. Next day, she was taken to a mental institute, and I didn't get to see her for next 18 months. Had one neighbor that I lived directly next to for 2 years, and then 3 houses down from him for another 3 years. Literally only saw him one time. His entire yard was overgrown and unkempt. Like 4 feet tall and more grass and weeds so thick you couldn't walk through it on an entire acre. The one time I saw him, I wasn't even sure it was him until he went in his house. He had about 1 million cats and a very nice RV falling to pieces in his backyard. I can't explain why he seemed so weird, but holy shit, how do you never bother cutting the grass, even if just the front yard? Had another neighbor who used to come over and hit on me a lot. Kept calling me a good girl and invited me to come over in a bikini and drink beer with him. Dude must have thought I was dumb as hell. Never took him up on his very kind offer. Dirty old man. My neighbor is my uncle. Middle-aged, creepy. Every time we come into his house, there are a lot of porn DVDs laying around. He is into conspiracy theories and all that shit. He gets into trouble very easily because he is deeply convinced that everyone is following him. He shouts at the postman, at people in grocery store, basically at everyone. Once he went in the main square of the town to see fireworks, and punched a guy who was recording the fireworks on his phone because he was deeply convinced that the guy was recording him on the behalf of the government. He is a flat earther, an anti-vaxxer, and convinced that the government is composed by holograms under the secret rule of lizard people. Wish I was kidding. His girlfriend is not a bad woman, but she ain't the sharpest tool in the shed. She has 2 sons from a previous marriage. One isn't exactly brilliant, but can build professional bikes from the ground up, and is overall an okay guy, very into cycling and sporty. The other was the sweetest kid, at some point started to become exactly like my uncle, very withdrawn, and every time he sees you, he stares into your soul without blinking for 5 minutes straight. He never talks outside of the house, never. We don't live in the USA, and my dad sometimes says that if we didn't have strong gun control laws, he would probably end up shooting someone in a very public place. Our first house. Couple next to us was maybe 10 years older. Wife was as a sweetheart. Husband was rarely seen. She would go for walks with my wife, always check on us, and would stand outside at bus stop with other parents watching kids go and come back from school, even though her kids were gone or past that age. I always felt kids were a little bit safer outside because I just knew she was likely watching too. Husband, on the other hand, worked bizarre hours. She said he was a CPA and had demanding clients, but he would come home at like 1 a.m. and turn around and leave at like 5 a.m. and occasionally wouldn't see him for a few days, but she confirmed all his clients were local. They had 1 kid at home, high school age, and he was pleasant enough for a teenager, and I never got weird vibes, but they had 2 daughters who rarely came home. She said the daughters couldn't wait to be on their own. One night my wife and her sat on back porch for a few hours, and she gave a creepy insight into his bedroom preferences to my wife. Apparently he liked her to lie perfectly still, and he would just stare and play with her boobs for a legit 2 hours. She would just lie there and wait for it to be over. He either had second family or was a serial killer. We still exchange Christmas cards and Facebook pleasantries with her 15 years later. My wife will grab lunch with her once a year or so too, such a sweetheart trapped with a psychopath. Thanks for listening. If you like our work, do subscribe because your support helps us keep this channel alive.